I am such a fan of the World Rally Championship. It's so exciting, and I really love talking about the cars which just didn't go so well, the cars which didn't quite make it because the stories behind them are so intriguing. Here are some of the most intriguing rally cars I've covered. Now, this is a supercut video, so it's of all the best. Now, here's the thing. With this sort of video, you could go and do something, have this on in the background. You can watch the whole thing in one go if you want, and if you do that, I might have to give you some sort of medal. I can't afford to give everyone who does that a medal, so you'll have to take a imaginary one, but I shall give you that. But put it in the background or watch the whole thing, however you want to watch it. Supercut videos are cool, and here are some of the coolest World Rally cars I've covered on this channel. The year is 1989, and communism has just fallen in Czechoslovakia. The process of transitioning to a market economy is now underway. The state-owned car manufacturer, Škoda, would be privatised as part of this transition. The trouble is, Škoda had a terrible reputation. By Western standards, Škodas were still considered to be terrible cars. If you said Škoda in 1989, you'd likely hear someone ask, how do you double the value of a Škoda? To which the answer would be, fill up the petrol tank. But it's not all bad news. As they say, when one door closes, another one opens. Although that might just be the poor build quality.
Come on, what do you call a skip on wheels, eh? A Škoda convertible.
It's not funny.
In 1991, Škoda would be bought by VW. Under VW ownership, the brand would begin transitioning to using VW platforms for their cars. One of these new cars produced under VW ownership would be the Octavia. The first generation Škoda Octavia would be using the platform from the Mark IV VW Golf. Whilst the Mark IV Golf is widely hated and considered to be a floppy, unresponsive puddle of diarrhea, it's still better than anything Škoda had produced under communism. But Škoda had an issue still. They had a terrible reputation from their communist past. In the late 1990s, it was still the case that if you said Škoda, people would expect the engine power of a handheld drill combined with the ride quality and creature comforts of a 1930s tractor. Škoda needed to turn this reputation around and show the world they meant business. The brand needed to show that they could compete with the big boys over in the West. And what better way to show off your engineering prowess than to go rallying? This is the story of the Škoda Octavia WRC. Škoda had a history of motorsport. Even under communism, Škoda's lightweight cars made up for their lack of power with their rear engine handling. They never entered in the top classes of rallying, but in the lower classes, they were actually quite successful. Škoda's long history on the rally stages of the world made the WRC the perfect sport for them to crack. But no longer would they be entering the sport on easy mode in the junior classes. They wanted to tackle the top class, and the new World Rally Car regulations were perfect for what they wanted to achieve. But our story does not begin with the Octavia WRC itself. It begins with another car. In need of some experience in the World Rally Championship, Škoda first decided to enter the F2 kit car class, continuing the brand's tradition of entering in the lower classes of rallying. But the F2 class wasn't like the junior classes of old. These weren't low-powered production spec economy cars. These were ultra-lightweight, technologically advanced thoroughbred rally cars. In fact, in certain conditions, the F2 class cars were actually faster than the Group A and World Rally cars that contested the top class. It would be here where Škoda could hone in their engineering skills and prepare for the main challenge of the World Rally car class. They started out with the Felicia kit car. The Škoda Felicia was an updated version of the late 80s Škoda Favorit that incorporated some VW Group parts and better quality manufacturing. The Felicia kit car would win the 1994 2-litre Rally World Cup, the 1990s equivalent of WRC2 today. The Felicia kit car would be replaced by the far more powerful and advanced Octavia kit car starting from 1997. The Octavia kit car was powered by a VW Group 2-litre naturally aspirated engine. The kit car would serve as the basis for the later World Rally car. The Octavia kit car was not a particularly special car within the F2 kit car class, scoring modest results throughout 1998. The car was also quite rare due to the fact that it was only used in 2 seasons before being sold to privateers. Only 7 Octavia kit cars were produced, compared with 20 Seat Ibiza kit cars and 112 Peugeot 307 Maxi kit cars. But the results were not the important thing for the Octavia kit car. The Octavia kit car was to serve as the basis for the World Rally car. This was the same strategy Citroën was employing with the Citroën Zara kit car, serving as the basis for the World Rally car, which won 3 drivers and 3 manufacturers' world championships. Having completed a season with the Octavia kit car, Škoda was ready to debut their World Rally car in 1999. The car was to be driven by Bruno Thierry, Emil Trina, Pavel Sibera, and experienced one-time rally winner Armin Schwarz. (1999) saw the debut of many new World Rally cars. Ford had introduced the Focus, Peugeot brought out their 206. The Škoda Octavia was ready. All the hard work of the engineers and mechanics had led to this moment, when the Škoda Octavia would debut. But, unfortunately for Škoda, Armin Schwarz developed an electrical issue whilst driving to the start line. He retired from the rally before even reaching the start line. This left only Pavel Sibera to represent the Czech manufacturer, but it seemed that lightning could strike twice. Sibera's Octavia ground to a halt on the road section after the start ramp before reaching the first stage. Neither car had even driven a single competitive kilometre, yet both had already retired. Škoda's rally was over. The team would miss the following 2 rounds in Sweden and Kenya, as they were only doing a partial campaign in 1999 to develop the car, with both cars retiring in Spain and Portugal. Although at least this time, the car made it onto the stages. It would take until round 8 before the Octavia actually finished a rally, and even when it did finish, the car proved to be severely lacking in pace. To be fair on Škoda, unreliability was the norm in late 90s rallying. Colin McRae managed to finish 6th in the Drivers' Championship in 1999, despite only finishing 3 out of the 14 events that year. Škoda's poor showing in 1999 was not the end of the world for them though. 1999 was intended to purely be a test season for Škoda to develop the Octavia. Still, Škoda were hoping to finish the 1999 season on a high. Stage 1 looked to be another poor showing from the Škoda team. Bruno Thierry and Armin Schwarz placed 19th and 21st respectively, but over the course of the rally, things would begin to improve. Armin Schwarz would make his way up the leaderboard, but it was Bruno Thierry who really impressed. On stage 2, he finished 8th on that stage, promoting him to 13th overall. And on stage 6, he placed 4th. The result was that he improved his overall position to 11th by the end of day 1. And he wasn't done yet. On day 2, he'd climb yet another spot on the leaderboard to 10th place, but it was day 3 when Bruno really impressed. Impressive pace early on in the day saw Thierry climb to 7th on the leaderboard, and then something miraculous happened. On stage 20, Tommy Mäkinen's engine failed. Then, on stage 21, Carlos Sainz's suspension broke, and on the final stage, the same happened to Didier Aurier. Thierry finished 4th, bringing Škoda their first points. Meanwhile, Schwarz, despite showing some impressive pace as well, crashed out. For the 2000 season, it would again be another partial campaign for the Škoda team. However, in 2000, Škoda had sorted out its reliability after the woeful 1999 season, with the team having only a single mechanical retirement for the entire 2000 season of the World Rally Championship. The car's later reliability and its large size would give it the nickname the Czech Tank. However, this is also the issue with the Škoda Octavia WRC. Škoda had taken the World Rally car rules quite literally with the Octavia. It was the right size for the class, it had all the features that a World Rally car would be expected to have, and it was built well. It had nothing more than what you'd expect a World Rally car in the era would have. This meant it wasn't particularly innovative. It didn't have active suspension, ABS, paddle shift, or any of the other new tech coming into early 2000s rally car. It was outdated from day 1, and this led to a car which was reliable after solving the teething problems, but it also meant it was incredibly slow. The Evo 2 version was unveiled in Cyprus in 2000, but the car did not provide the boosting results the Czech team wanted for 2000, with it still being a tough, reliable, but ultimately slow and uninnovative rally car. The Evo 2 was again used in 2001, and in the new year, the results finally started to improve for the big Octavia. Armin Schwarz shocked the world to win the first stage by wrestling the Czech Tank to 4th place on the tight and twisty stage 1, going ahead of the likes of Colin McRae, Carlos Sainz and Tommy Mäkinen. The following few stages would prove difficult for Schwarz, who would drop to 9th position overall, but impressive pace in the second half of day 1 would see the highly experienced German back up into 5th place overall by the end of the day, and even better, this was on pure pace. Bruno Thierry would also record a top 10 finish, but scored no points as they were only awarded up to 6th place at the time. Bad luck would befall the Škoda team over the next 4 rounds. Armin Schwarz would crash out in Sweden, the clutch would let go in Portugal, and the steering would break in Spain. As for Bruno Thierry, he would finish 10th in Sweden, retire in Portugal with electrical issues, and finish 10th again in Spain. But it was the next round in Argentina when the worst of Škoda's luck would come. After stage 10 of Argentina was completed, Armin Schwarz was 11th, behind his teammate Bruno Thierry in 10th. They were out of the points, but it was early in a rally known for being tough and causing retirements, something the Czech Tank was cut out for. But as the Škoda pairing were parked on the roadside waiting at a time control to enter the service park, a fire broke out in the spectators' car park at the service park. The fire had spread to around 10 cars, leading to the local fire brigade being dispatched to extinguish the fire. As the fire truck was on its way going in the opposite direction to the rally's route on the road section, it approached a corner too fast, colliding with Škoda's chief engineer Dr. Jens Pohlmann before overturning and colliding with both Octavias. Miraculously, nobody was killed, and the crew of both Škodas, Armin Schwarz, Manfred Hiemer, Bruno Thierry and Stefan Prévost, were uninjured. However, Dr. Jens Pohlmann was left in a critical condition. Both Škodas would retire from the rally as a result. Dr. Jens Polman made a full recovery.
Also Stefan, and suddenly I hear the people crying, and suddenly I saw this big truck on me, and fortunately I was not fastened, and I had just time to move, and this truck came over the cabbage. But unfortunately I saw also when he hit Mr. Polman, our big boss, but I will remember this picture all my life because it's unbelievable.
The next two rounds would again be rough rallies, Cyprus and Greece. After the Argentina disaster, the famously rocky Mediterranean rallies would pay into the Octavia's strengths, but they would ultimately disappoint as the team again failed to score any points. But what was coming up next would be the toughest of the tough rallies on the calendar. Škoda would bring 3 cars to Kenya for the only African round on the calendar. The 3-day event would see crews cover 2,200 kilometres, 1,129 of which would be on competitive stages. Drivers had to watch for mud holes, rough rocks, powdery sounds called fesh that could see even the most well-prepared car getting stuck, wildlife, and all sorts of other hazards. But the most unique hazard the drivers would have to deal with was local traffic. Safari Rally Kenya was one of the last FIA-sanctioned events to feature cars competing at full speed on roads still open to local traffic. As a safety measure, each car would have a helicopter flying ahead to warn the drivers of hazards or traffic. The African adventure would see the most car-breaking conditions imaginable thrown at the event's 40 entrants. It didn't take long before competitors began to fall by the wayside. On the very first stage, the Subaru of Richard Burns had slowed to a crawl. The front left suspension had collapsed. Colin McRae would change from his usual flat-out driving style in the hopes of keeping the car from being destroyed by the rough Kenyan roads. On stage 1, he was third fastest, 28 seconds down. Magnan would hit a bird on his way through stage 1, setting the second fastest time, but the fastest stage time would go to none other than Armin Schwarz. The Škoda team was leading their first ever world rally. Škoda knew that they didn't have the fastest car, but they did have the strongest car. Their strategy was to push flat out and bait the other teams into pushing flat out as well and breaking their cars. The other teams took the bait. On stage 2, as the faster cars picked up the pace, Schwarz was only able to set the 6th fastest time, dropping into 2nd place. But Škoda were playing the long game here. On stage 3, Armin Schwarz would hit a bad bump, injuring his hand. But the car was still okay. The Czech tank may have fared better than its driver, but the loss of pace meant Schwarz was only 8th on the stage, falling to 5th overall. But the long game was working, as stage 3 saw more competitors drop out. Colin McRae's steering arm would fail not once, but twice, with a second time leading to a close call with a crowd of spectators that he missed, and also would lead to the end of his rally. Stage 4 was a bad stage for Peugeot. Didier Auriol's Peugeot 206 would end up burning to the ground, whilst Marcus Grönholm's 206 would get stuck after being thrown into the air over a bad bump. The short wheelbase made the 206 particularly susceptible to this sort of crash. But amongst all this carnage, by the end of day 1, Armin Schwarz was still running in the points, sitting 6th overall. Day 2 of the rally started with WRC's longest stage that year, the 124km long Marigat stage. Benefiting from good pace and the retirement of Carlos Sainz, Schwarz was now up to 4th place. The following stage, Schwarz set the 3rd fastest time, maintaining his overall position of 4th place. The cliffs of stage 7 proved to be no challenge for the Czech tank, nor were the mud holes of stage 8. The bumps on stage 9 were so severe, they caused the roof of Tommi Mäkinen's leading Mitsubishi to detach. By the end of day 2, Schwarz had his Octavia in a stable 4th position. Day 3 started with controversy. Heavy fog meant that only Tommy Mackinnon's helicopter had been able to take off. Spotter helicopters were a vital safety tool on the Safari Rally to keep the local road users safe by warning the rally drivers of traffic or wildlife ahead. Mackinnon was allowed to start, as he had his helicopter running. Harry Rovanperä in the second place Peugeot was also allowed to start, as the FIA allowed Rovanperä to use their helicopter. But with the FIA adamant that the drivers would run the stage, cars began to enter the stages without their safety helicopters, much to the annoyance of Armin Schwarz.
Everybody, all teams and all drivers agree that we don't go into any section without a helicopter. And now they changed the regulation that the stewards say we have to go, and I think that for a safety point is not correct.
The lack of helicopters nearly saw Schwarz eliminated from the rally, as the flying tank nearly had a head-on collision with a local car, but luckily disaster was avoided. Meanwhile, the regular Safari Rally hazards of rough road conditions certainly caused some reliability issues. Freddie Loik suffered a blown turbo in the Mitsubishi. Meanwhile, François Delacour broke a prop shaft. Further down the stage, third place Petter Solberg was making good time. His Subaru was fast, but his front right wheel was even faster. Given the performance loss from not having a front right wheel, Solberg retired, but the wheel did set the second fastest stage time. All of this was good news for Armin Schwarz, who was now into third place, but despite his promotion to third place, Armin only had one topic he wanted to talk about in the post-stage interview.
It pissed me off. They say it is a helicopter available, there must be a helicopter available, so we went now through the stage without a helicopter. And then getting the helicopter in the stage with all the...
But with stage 11 cancelled, there were now only 2 stages remaining. Armin could see the podium in sight. The Czech tank, the underdog, the big simple saloon, was finally doing exactly what Škoda was hoping for. They were a small Czech team with a technological simple car, taking on the high-tech beasts from established Western manufacturers. Nobody was making any Škoda jokes now. Instead, rally fans around the world cheered on the plucky Octavia as it powered towards the finish line. They may not have been leading, but finally, the Octavia was ready to prove that this was a car to be taken seriously. Now, it was just time to bring it home. But with the length of the Safari Rally, cars were at the edge of their limits. Škoda had run out of new dampers, the result being a very rough ride for the 2 remaining Octavia crews in the rally. But the rough rides didn't stop the Czech tank. Stage 12 was completed without fuss, and now for stage 13, the final stage of the rally. On stage 13, immediately there was bad news. One of the Škodas crashed into a hole, starting a fire in the engine bay. The good news, it was not Armin Schwarz's car that was out. Being on the final stage with no issues for Schwarz, as the experienced German crossed the line, he made history. The first overall podium for Škoda in the history of the WRC. The Škoda had proven its strength and reliability. Only 15 of the 40 cars which started the rally finished it, but the rough terrain couldn't kill the Octavia. The Škoda Octavia WRC Evo 2 was used for the remainder of 2001, as well as 2002. Schwarz would move to Hyundai for 2002, whilst Kenneth Eriksson and Tony Gardemeister would be the full-time Škoda drivers for that year. Škoda would score points twice in 2002, including a double points finish in Argentina. For 2003, the final version of the car was unveiled, the Evo 3. With points on offer for the top 8 in 2002, the Octavia scored in the majority of rounds it entered, but only 2 of those were top 6 finishes. The car would be replaced mid-season by the new Fabia WRC, concluding the Octavia's career as a factory World Rally car. The car's lack of success made it unattractive to privateers for the World Rally Championship. This meant Octavias very quickly found their way into various national championships around the world. Of the 25 Octavia WRCs produced, 5 are still actively rallying to this day. The car's strength has also been proven through the relentless march of time too. As of today, only 2 Octavia WRCs has ever been written off by crashes or fire. The Czech tank lives on. And to the 24% of my audience who come from Czechia, yes, I will pronounce it correctly this time. The Czech tank was a peculiar car in the WRC at the time. The Octavia WRC was the biggest car in the championship. It also lacked the innovative features of its competitors. One of its competitors, the Peugeot 206, had a particularly innovative way of meeting the minimum size rule. The road car that the rally car was based on had to reach a minimum length, but Peugeot wanted a short wheelbase to make the car more responsive. Their solution was to homologate a road version of the 206 with massive front and rear bumpers to make the car long enough. Škoda was caught blindsided by how technologically advanced their competitors had been. The Czech tank's simplicity may have helped it in Kenya, but its lack of agility hurt its pace everywhere else. The Octavia WRC may have been a widely loved car thanks to its size, its performance in Kenya, and Roman Cresta's interesting choice when looking for a parking spot, but the World Championship is not a popularity contest. To win the World Rally Championship, you need something more. You need something innovative, something perhaps a little smaller, something with maybe a bit more technology. This is the story of the Škoda Fabia WRC. The Fabia WRC was rumoured to exist for quite some time before its existence was finally confirmed. The 2003 season started and Škoda was still rallying the Octavia in the World Rally Championship. However, by March of 2003, photos of the new Fabia WRC had surfaced. The world knew the Fabia was on its way. The Rally of Germany would see the debut of the new Fabia WRC. Tony Gardemeister and 1994 world champion Didier Auriol would enter the rally with a new Fabia, whilst Jan Kopecky would enter with the Octavia. Unfortunately for Škoda, problems would immediately emerge. The anti-lag system had failed for Tony Gardemeister. Didier Auriol also wasn't showing much pace. On stage 1 he was 13th. Things would get worse for Škoda too. Auriol's engine wouldn't make it past stage 7, and Gardemeister's driveshaft would break on stage 11. For both Fabias, the rally was over. Only Jan Kopecky in the Octavia would finish the rally, taking 20th place. It seemed that the unreliability of 1999 that affected the Octavia was now coming back for the Fabia in 2003. It wasn't just the unreliability that was the problem. That could just be considered teething problems for the new Fabia. The car was quite clearly still slow. Some of this could be blamed on the team's lack of testing, but the car was still lacking the technology of its rivals. For example, there was still no paddle shift yet, something Škoda's rivals had been using for years at this point. fans were hoping that Škoda would replace the low-tech approach of the Octavia with a new, high-tech, optimised Fabia, but it seemed that they'd actually just brought a miniature Octavia. The Fabia's pace would not improve for the rest of 2003, with the car failing to score a single point. The Fabia's performance was significantly worse than that of the Octavia Evo 3, which scored all of Škoda's 23 points for that year before the Rally of Germany. In fact, the car was so bad in 2003 that Škoda decided not to bother showing up for the first 5 rounds in 2004. Instead, they used this time to develop an updated version of the Fabia. The new version would be designed in collaboration with Audi, using their wind tunnel to work on the car's aerodynamics. It would also finally adopt paddle shift, using the ring style of paddle shift that was also used by Peugeot. It seemed that Škoda was finally taking the WRC seriously and not just showing up with a tank and finishing 11th. Finally, partway through 2004, the Fabia was ready to go. By stage 2, both cars were out of the top 10, but it was the gap that mattered more than the position, and Toni Gardemeister was just 15.9 seconds off the lead and ahead of Sebastian Loeb. Schwarz was in 16th, 25 seconds down. The Škoda's pace was finally something other than laughable. Although they weren't on rally leading pace, they weren't expecting to be either. 2004 was just a test season for Škoda, much like 1999 and 2000. Things would change for the Škoda team, however. On stage 3, Armin Schwarz's left rear suspension would break. The rough Greek roads weren't doing the Fabia any good. Armin Schwarz would retire from the day. Toni Gardemeister, on the other hand, continued to set reasonable pace, climbing as high as 6th place on the leaderboard thanks to his consistent stage times, but lightning would strike twice for the Škoda team. Gardemeister's left rear suspension would break on stage 9. It seemed as though Škoda's rally was over, and had this occurred at the previous rally, it would have been. However, the FIA had introduced a new rule at this event called Super Rally Regulations. Cars that retired on one day could rejoin the rally later on. Under current regulations, these cars are eligible to appear on the final results after taking severe time penalties for the stages they miss. However, for 2004, cars restarting on Super Rally rules were excluded from the final results, meaning rejoining under Super Rally rules would only be useful for testing. Luckily for Škoda, testing is exactly why they'd entered the rally. The Fabias would treat the rest of the rally as a test session. The remainder of 2004 was to continue as a season for testing as well. However, in Finland, they would bring 3 cars. Armin Schwarz wouldn't make a huge impression, finishing 12th, but Toni Gardemeister would finish in 8th, scoring a point, and gravel specialist Jani Paasunen would finish 6th, putting 3 points to his name. This was a promising result for Škoda. It finally seemed like they had a car that worked. Unfortunately for Škoda, the next rounds wouldn't see a repeat of this. Armin Schwarz did manage to score 1 point by finishing 8th in France, but that would be Škoda's best result for the rest of the year. For 2005, Škoda would enter the Manufacturers' Championship with the Fabia. This was not a test season anymore. This was the Fabia's debut proper. The team would have a very flexible driver lineup for 2005. 8 different drivers would drive for the team. Armin Schwarz would drive in every round except for Sweden, where the DTM champion, who would later go on to win the World Rallycross Championship, Mattias Ekström, would replace him. But it soon turned out that the Fabia wouldn't have an easy year. Come Monte Carlo, and Armin Schwarz would crash out of 13th place. Alex Bengay would also retire, but restart under Super Rally rules and fail to score any points. Rally Sweden would see Janne Tuohino briefly reaching the points-paying positions before a lack of pace saw him drop out of the top 8 before retiring with suspension issues. Touring car legend and then current DTM champion Matthias Ekström wouldn't make much of an impression for most of the rally either. He finished 10th, but on the second last stage, he did manage to place 3rd on the stage classification. In Mexico, both cars finished, but well outside the points. In New Zealand, Sardinia, Cyprus, Turkey, Greece, Argentina, Finland, and Germany, the car failed to impress. But the Fabia finally saw a mild turn of fortune in the next event. The Rally of Australia was a notable rally for the Škoda team, specifically because it marked the return of 1995 world champion Colin McRae. McRae had driven for Škoda previously in the year at the Rally of GB, finishing 7th, but at that time he hadn't driven in a rally since 2003. Now he had some experience back in the car, Colin was ready to get back on the pace. But despite the Scots' credentials, all eyes were on the battle at the front between Loeb, Solberg, Atkinson and Grönholm. All 4 of them looked to be just as likely to take the lead. The coming 26 stages of the rally looked to bring much excitement to the rally fans of the world. Local star Chris Atkinson was especially impressive on the familiar Western Australian stages, but problems were bubbling under the surface for Subaru's rookie. He felt though the steering didn't feel right. Despite this, he was fastest on stage 3. After stage 3, the top 4 were separated by just 4 seconds. Meanwhile, Colin McRae was all the way down in 13th position. But on stage 4, Colin picked up the pace. He went second fastest on stage 4, elevating up to 6th position. The Fabia was finally showing some genuinely good pace. On stage 7, Chris Atkinson's steering would finally fail, costing him huge amounts of time and dropping him from the lead to 13th overall. This was bad news for the local fans who saw an Australian driver drop from the lead to outside the top 10 at his home rally, but it was good news for Colin McRae and Škoda. Colin was up to 5th. Meanwhile, Loeb had just taken 2nd place, dropping Grönholm to 3rd. Grönholm was hoping to get his place back, but it seemed that Peugeot had hired the same people from the 737 MAX production line to assemble their rally cars. Loose bolts on the front right suspension caused it to collapse. Grönholm's rally was over. Colin McRae would finish 4th on stage 7, elevating his overall position to 3rd. Škoda was in a podium position. McRae had unlocked the potential of the Fabia. Francois Duval behind in 4th wouldn't give the 1995 world champion an easy run. Duval had Colin's old car, the Citroën Zara, and the Zara was fast, with one Zara battling Colin McRae for 3rd place. The other was battling Peter Solberg for the lead. Loeb had just taken 1st place from the Norwegian on stage 8, and on stage 9, he tried to go even faster by taking an alternative line through this corner. Unfortunately, the alternative line didn't help. Loeb retired, leaving Solberg out in the lead. This would keep McRae on the podium, despite losing a place to Francois Duval. Being on the podium didn't distract the rally legend. He'd been in this position many times before. It didn't matter if he were in a Fabia, a Focus, a Zara, or an Impreza. Colin only knew one speed, flat out. The Fabia stunned the spectators as it flew high over the jumps, but despite the spectacular driving of McRae, there was nothing he could do to keep up with the pace of the Citroën. Getting the spot back from Duval seemed like a lost cause, but he was still on the podium. It wouldn't be a mechanically easy time for the Scotsman either. Stage 13 saw the paddle shift system fail, forcing McRae to shift using the backup mechanical gear lever. The loss of paddle shift itself only causes a minor loss in pace, but when the system fails, other hydraulic systems in the all-wheel drive system lose their hydraulic pressure and also fail, the result being a car that can be very tricky to drive. Further down the road, Petter Solberg was making good time. His Subaru was fast, but the kangaroo in the road certainly wasn't. The radiator was destroyed, and the engine subsequently failed. Given the performance loss from not having a functioning engine, Solberg retired. McRae, however, would not gain a position, as Harry Rovanperä took second place. Rovanperä would push hard and extend his lead over McRae, but he pushed too hard. Rovanperä spun, handing second back to McRae. This would be a short-lived high point though. Rovanperä continued to push, and on stage 22 took back second place. After the 23rd stage, McRae was in third. Škoda decided to change McRae's gearbox. This decision would prove to be disastrous, as the job took longer than expected. Rally teams are given a maximum amount of time to work on their cars. Going any longer than that, and time penalties will be incurred. Go even longer, and you won't be allowed to continue the rally. That's exactly what happened to Colin McRae's Fabia. With only 3 stages to go, the number 12 Fabia was declared as over time limit. This exceptionally rare type of retirement was the only time McRae was out due to OTL in his long rally career, and it was right as he was about to secure Škoda Fabia's first podium. The disappointment was immense, but despite the DNF, McRae showed that the car actually had some potential. It may not have been as fast as the Zara or the Impreza, but it was certainly improving. The following year, Škoda, Mitsubishi, Peugeot and Citroën left the WRC, but the cars from these manufacturers continued to be run by privateer teams. The main privateer team running Škoda Fabias would be an Austrian team called Baumschlager Rally and Racing, entering under the name of Red Bull Škoda. Due to the uncompetitive nature of the Fabia, the car did not see many privateer appearances in the World Championship after 2006, with the car quickly finding its way into national championships. But the Fabia's WRC story didn't end here. Škoda would go back to what they did best, entering in the second class of the World Rally Championship. The Škoda Fabia S2000 used the Mark II Fabia as its basis, but that still used the exact same PQ24 platform as the Fabia Mark I. The Fabia S2000 would go on to become the most successful S2000 car ever. In addition to that, in 2012, a frustrated Sébastien Ogier would leave the championship-dominating Citroën team to join Volkswagen Motorsport. But the Polo WRC wasn't ready yet, so what did they do? They entered a Fabia S2000 in 2012. Being a lower-classed car entered into the top category, it was not competitive, but it did give Volkswagen team some much-needed experience in rally operations. The following year saw the introduction of the VW Polo WRC, but something seemed awfully familiar about the car. Of course, it was the platform. The VW Polo WRC was based on the Volkswagen Group's PQ25 platform, an update to the platform used in the Mark I Fabia, the basis of the World Rally Car. How did the Polo WRC go? It became the most successful World Rally Car in history. 83% of rallies that the VW Polo World Rally Car entered in, it won. It won every Constructors and every Drivers' Championship it entered. In the 4 years it was a part of the World Rally Championship, it didn't just rewrite the history books, it used the history books as its toilet paper. It wasn't just the Polo that was dominating either. In 2013, the rule set, then known as R5, now known as Rally 2, was implemented. Škoda entered into the R5 class again with their new Fabia, another PQ25 based car. So how did the Fabia R5 go? It went well. Very well. A Škoda Fabia won the team's championship in WRC 2 in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. The new Škoda Fabia RS Rally 2 is yet another innovative and game-changing car. It has new advanced aerodynamics that give it 50% more downforce than its already dominant predecessor, and does so more efficiently. It has visibly more grip than any other Rally 2 car. It is an engineering masterpiece. With the Rally 1 regulations set to be rewritten in 2025 to be more similar to the Rally 2 regulations, we may see Škoda come back to the top class soon, and with how good the Fabia is right now, they might finally be a front-running contender. The Škoda Fabia WRC may have been a failure on its own, but it was the beginning of a long line of highly successful rally cars. And since I made that video, Škoda really did come quite close to getting a podium at Safari Rally Kenya again this year, because it was running in, I think, 6th or 5th place, and all of the cars ahead of that car, except for I think Takamoto Katsuta, had some reliability problems, and there was big questions over whether these Rally 1 cars would make it to the finish, and the Fabia would have inherited the podium had that happened, and it was looking really quite likely that these cars would fail because they were just falling apart, and that was an incredible story. But Škoda is not the only Volkswagen Group brand, and nor is VW itself. There was one other Volkswagen Group brand that was in the WRC in the early 2000s as well. In the late 1990s, two companies, Seat and Škoda, both had the same idea. But what was that idea? What exactly do these two companies have in common? For starters, Seat is a company that has a recent history which in many ways is quite similar to Škoda. Both are owned by the Volkswagen Group, and both produce cars using Volkswagen Group platforms. The companies really do have a lot in common with each other, but the idea they both had at the same time had nothing to do with boring corporate ownership structures, shared platforms, or anything of that nature. What they were doing was far more exciting. But what was this amazing thing they were doing? Of course, it was the decision to go rallying. Seat, as a brand, has a history of rallying in the lower classes, although not as extensively as the Škoda. Also, much like Škoda, Seat competed in the F2 kit car class during the late 1990s. Their car, the Ibiza kit car, was highly successful. It won the FIA 2-litre World Rally Cup in 1996, 1997, and 1998. Seat clearly knew what they were doing in the F2 kit car class. Just like Škoda and Citroën, they wanted their kit car to be the basis for their World Rally car, but there was a problem. The Seat Ibiza was too small for the WRC regulations, which required that all cars be no shorter than 4,000mm. Seat needed a bigger car, and luckily for them, they had the perfect option: the Cordoba. The Seat Cordoba is based on the Seat Ibiza, but it's the sedan and coupe version. The Cordoba Coupe would be the basis for their new World Rally car. Seat's lack of experience in WRC meant they mostly used external contractors for their car's design. Seat set high expectations with their dominance in the 2-litre class. For 1998, they would enter WRC on a part-time basis with the aims of fighting at the front by 2000.
Colin McRae's last 2 visits to Finland both
After much waiting, the Seat Cordoba WRC was finally unveiled. It featured a striking bright yellow livery and an enormous rear wing. The car certainly caught many people's eyes. Seat had realistic expectations for the Rally of Finland. It was the car's first event. This was just to test the car and see what was what. Finland certainly isn't the easiest round to test a brand new car. The jumps are enormous. A car that's fragile will be shattered when it comes back down to earth. The driver lineup that Seat would use would consist of Harry Rovanperä and Oriol Gomez. This would be the only time that Gomez would drive the car though. The pace was as you'd expect it to be for any car on its first rally. Not particularly good. Rovanperä would be in 13th place after stage 1, with Gomez in 22nd position. Rovanperä would drive the rally conservatively, climbing to 9th by the 5th stage of the rally. 9th would be Harry's highest position for the rest of the rally, as he fell back down the order in the closing stages, eventually coming home to finish in 11th. Meanwhile, Oriol Gomez crashed on stage 20. A rather disappointing end to his career in a world rally car, which lasted only 1 rally. Marc Duez would drive the next round in San Remo and Australia, finishing 16th in San Remo and crashing out in Australia. A rather disappointing end to the career in a world rally car, which only lasted 2 rallies at the top level. One thing that's not disappointing though is this cool new YouTube feature. Take the video out of full screen for a second and check this out. Look at the subscribe button. Isn't that cool? It gets even cooler if you subscribe to the channel as well. Anyway, back to the video. The final round of the season in Great Britain did see Seat's first points though, as Harry Rovanperä finished 6th after Carlos Sainz retired on the final stage. For 1999, Seat would enter the full season. For most rounds, the driver lineup would consist of Harry Rovanperä and Italian one-hit wonder Piero Liatti. Liatti was the winner of the 1997 Rally Monte Carlo, but in 1999, the best he could do was 6th. This did mean that Seat did start the 1999 season with points. Liatti would not drive the next round in Sweden. Instead, a young Marcus Grönholm would drive the Seat. Unfortunately for Seat, fuel contamination would result in Grönholm's retirement from the rally. The team's next points would then come in Kenya, as Harry Rovanperä finished 6th. But things would not go well for Seat after that. Both cars retired in Portugal. Both failed to score in Spain and France. After the Rally of Spain though, a French magazine called Enchappement wanted to write an article about the Seat Cordoba, in which they would test the car. Seat agreed to this, but they had one condition. Whoever they chose to test drive the car had to be a rally driver of some description. Enchappement picked a young driver from the F2 kit car class. Although he'd recently crashed out to the Rally of Spain in his Citroën Saxo kit car, he was said to be quite a good driver by the few who had heard of him at the time. His name was Sebastian Loeb, and he'd never driven a world rally car before. For Loeb, the rest was certainly history, but for Seat, there would not be the same happy ending. The following WRC rounds did not go well for the Spanish manufacturer. Both cars retired in Argentina and Greece. Things were looking absolutely atrocious for Seat. Hopes were not high for the next round. How hard the embankments on the side of the road are. He slammed his Toyota into it hard, and as it turns out, the embankments are quite hard too. He lost 3 minutes, handing 3rd spot to Tony Gardemeister. Gardemeister now had even better gaps than before. He knew he just had to drive consistently. But Gardemeister clearly had a point to prove. On stage 18, he set the second fastest time, and again on stage 20, Gardemeister was going for it. But on stage 22, absolutely nothing out of the ordinary happened. Gardemeister continued to hold on to P3, and that would be the position he'd finish in. Tony Gardemeister had just delivered Seat their first overall podium ever in the World Championship, and he did it on his debut in the top class. The following round in Finland saw the introduction of the new Seat Cordoba WRC Evo 2. The new car had a smaller rear wing and reduced drag at the front, in addition to an update to the styling of the updated Cordoba street car. Both Cordobas would score in Finland, and Rovanperä brought more points in the Rally of China. The Cordobas would fail to impress in San Remo or Australia as well. But in that year's Rally GB, Seat managed to score another podium after plenty of retirements in the final few stages. The 2000 season saw an update to Seat's driver lineup. 1994 World Champion Didier Auriol would drive for the team after Toyota left the World Championship at the end of 1999. He would be joined by Tony Gardemeister. Harry Rovanperä was off to Peugeot. The Evo 2 version of the Cordoba was starting to prove troublesome on the reliability front though. Round 1 in Monte Carlo saw Didier Auriol's engine disintegrate. Engine troubles would then hit Gardemeister in Sweden. Round 3 of the season would be Safari Rally Kenya, and with a Seat Cordoba looking to be about as reliable as a 737 MAX, it wasn't looking good. The open road, long distance rally is a favourite among fans. The rough terrain, local traffic, wildlife, scenery and conditions make the rally always one to watch. I decided to include this specific rally partially because I absolutely love the Safari Rally, but mostly so I can include this absolutely hilarious image of Didier Auriol in a cowboy hat. Even before the first stage, Cowboy's teammate, Tony Gardemeister, would decide to pretend to be a learner driver whilst leaving service. To be fair to Tony, rally cars are notoriously easy to stall. His stall whilst leaving the service park didn't slow him down though. He finished the first stage in 5th position, a minute and a half slower than Carlos Sainz, who was 4th. The battle for second had only a second in it. Burns was 1 second behind Tommy Mäkinen, but the stage winner was Didier Auriol. This seems quite reminiscent of what the Škoda Octavia would do the following year, but Seat had a completely different strategy. Their car was fragile. Auriol wasn't pushing hard, he just wanted to get it to the finish. He was not expecting to win. Škoda, on the other hand, were expecting a stage win on the first stage of the 2001 Safari. It seemed that the Seat had experienced a turn of speed, and not even their drivers could figure out why. The highs of the unexpected stage win would not last for the Seat team. Tony Gardemeister's mid-stage weight reduction did not help his pace, and the competition upped their pace on the next, rougher stage. But the attrition did start rolling in. On stage 3, Mäkinen's suspension gave in. On the same stage, Seat had bad news. Tony Gardemeister's co-driver, Paavo Lukanda, had a neck injury from a testing crash earlier on. The rough roads had aggravated this injury, forcing the crew to retire. Meanwhile, Didier Auriol slipped back to 3rd position. The Subarus now with a commanding 1-2 lead in the rally, with a 4-time world champion Juha Känkkönen behind teammate Richard Burns. Day 2 would see Auriol drop another spot on stage 5, behind Colin McRae's Ford. after a poor start to the day. Gilles Panizzi in the Peugeot also retired on the 5th stage, and Marcus Grönholm on the 7th. After Grönholm's retirement on stage 7, Freddie Leutz would join him on the list of retirements too. 7 stages in, and both Mitsubishis as well as both Peugeots were out, but the fragile Seat Cordoba of Didier Auriol was still on the move, in 4th place. In fact, none of those retirements up to stage 7 had any effect on Didier, as they were all behind the 1994 world champion already. But on stage 8, things would change. Colin McRae's focus was unable to go forward anymore. McRae retired, promoting Auriol to 3rd place, but the fragile Cordoba was only just past halfway through. But with every passing kilometre, Auriol was getting closer and closer to bringing the Seat Cordoba onto the podium. Every minute that passed would lead him one step closer to turning La Decepción into La Sorpresa. But then, on stage 12, it finally happened. Didier Auriol crossed the last flying finish. He was 3rd. He had done it. The fragile Cordoba was on the podium at the toughest rally on the calendar. This would be the second last time Seat would score points in the WRC. Gardemeister's 6th place in the Rally of Australia would be the last. Seat would enter 5 rounds in 2002, with a driver lineup consisting of 2 drivers nobody has ever heard of. But the team would only finish 1 rally in that year's championship, when Marc Blasquez finished 16th in the Rally of Portugal. Gwyndaf Evans was the only Seat driver that anyone had actually heard of in the 2002 season. He entered just 1 round, his home event, Rally GB, where he would retire. That marked the end of the Seat Cordoba World Rally Car's time in the World Championship. It quickly ended up in national championships, as there was no privateer interest on a World Championship level. Only one Seat Cordoba is still actively rallying to this day. 6 were written off, with a remaining 15 gathering dust somewhere, perhaps in museums. So, where does this put Cordoba on the super scoreboard? In terms of cool factor, it's a really cool car. It has a cool name, it has a cool history, and of course, all rally cars are cool. And the fact that it was the first world rally car that Sebastian Loeb drove, as well as being driven by Didier Auriol, Marcus Grönholm, Harry Rovanperä, and Tony Gardemeister, that ups the cool factor massively. It's not quite the Octavia, but the Cordoba gets a 9 out of 10. The Cordoba is a beautiful rally car. The blue, yellow and red livery is striking and bold. The lines and proportions are exactly as they should be, and of course, it's a coupe. All of that makes it absolutely no surprise that this car is getting a 10 out of 10. The car did get quite a few podiums. The fact that the Volkswagen Group split their development budget across 2 brands who did not share any parts in the WRC, with the 2 cars using different platforms and 2 different engines, you get the feeling they've missed a trick of at least sharing an engine. The Octavia was always too big, but the Cordoba was the perfect size, and it did occasionally show some pace, but nothing spectacular. The Cordoba WRC gets a 4 out of 10 for potential. The Cordoba tried an innovative, massive rear wing on the pre-Evo version. It didn't work out for them, but they were definitely trying things. But they weren't really doing anything game-changing. The Cordoba gets a 5 out of 10 for innovation. The expectations for the Cordoba WRC were quite high. After the incredible performance of the Ibiza kit car, the Cordoba had big boots to fill when stepping into the top class. The Cordoba certainly had a gap between expectations and reality. It gets a 7 out of 10. The Cordoba had multiple memorable performances against the odds. The 3 podiums were prime examples, but they weren't the only ones. Gardemeister's 4th in Monte Carlo was another. The underwhelming Cordoba was often fighting higher on the leaderboard than it should have been. It gets a 9 out of 10. This puts the Seat Cordoba to 2nd on the Super Scoreboard. 2nd on the Super Scoreboard, that's pretty cool, but guess what? I have more cars coming up, because that was a rally car that failed in the early 2000s because it was a little bit simple and outdated. But what about when a rally car fails in the early 2000s because it's too complex and too modern for its era? Well, that's exactly what happened to Peugeot in 2004. 2004 was a competitive time in the World Rally Championship, with Subaru, Ford, Mitsubishi, Škoda, and PSA stablemates Citroën and Peugeot all competing, and with every round broadcasters on TV in the form of 1-hour highlights videos with the music turned loud enough to drown out everything the commentators said. The sport was as popular as ever. While it may be easy to think that Citroën and Peugeot, being from the same parent company, PSA, would work closely with each other in the World Rally Championship, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Peugeot and Citroën presented vastly different concepts to each other. What mattered most to Peugeot Sport was beating Citroën. For some of you, this video may seem familiar. That's because I posted an earlier version of it a year ago, but now I've redone the audio and added more information to make this video better than ever. In 2003, Citroën, with their fast and reliable Zara, along with possibly the best driver lineup in motorsport history, dominated the manufacturer's World Championship, with Sébastien Loeb finishing just 1 point shy of the World Drivers' Championship in his first full-time season of the World Rally Championship. It was clear to Peugeot Sport's management that the all-conquering 206 that won 3 Constructors' Championships in a row from 2000 to 2002, as well as 2 Drivers' Championships, was getting long in the tooth, having been in use since 1999. The new replacement was to be innovative, fast, and hopefully game-changing. What they produced was certainly innovative and fast from day one, but it wasn't game-changing in the way that Peugeot had hoped. To finish first, you have to finish. When Peugeot showed up in Monaco for the start of the traditional season-opening Rally Monte Carlo, it was clear to see that the manufacturer had been innovative with the new Peugeot 307. The car was first and only convertible to be entered in the World Rally Championship, albeit with the roof lock closed and the mechanism removed for weight reduction. This gave the car the aerodynamics of a 2-seater coupe instead of a hatchback, reducing the drag and increasing the downforce. The aerodynamics of the 307 were a clear step forward from the 206, with better cornering speed and improved top speed as a result. The car was also longer than its predecessor, leading to better stability at the expense of less responsiveness. The chassis of the 307 WRC was also innovative. It had a very flat windscreen, pushing the A-pillar forwards. This meant that the A-pillar was almost directly attached to the strut tower, giving the car an incredibly rigid front end. The road car also had an aluminium bonnet and plastic wheel arches and bumper. These materials were not allowed in the World Rally Car regulations, but the World Rally Car regulations also required partially standard bodywork, which meant that the FIA had to allow aluminium and plastic panels on all cars. The downside was that the convertible version of the Peugeot used a more rearward weight distribution, even with the roof removed. All of this was set to make the 307 a faster car than its predecessor, but the most notable feature of the 307 was the new, ultra-powerful engine. It was widely accepted throughout 2004 and 2005 that Peugeot had the most powerful engine of any manufacturer. In fact, the car was so powerful that Peugeot decided the car only needed a 4-speed gearbox. The logic behind the 4-speed box was simple. A gearbox works as a torque multiplier. A short gear ratio has a high torque multiplication effect, meaning the wheels get more torque and therefore better acceleration, but it also means there's a low top speed in that gear. Conversely, a long gear ratio has a low torque multiplication effect and a high top speed. Gear shifts can cost time, and the car already has enough torque, so they could cut out some of the shorter gears. There's no need to waste time with unnecessary gear changes. At the beginning of the rally, all seemed to be going well for the 307. It had won the first special stage it ever competed on, resulting in double world champion Markus Grönholm taking a convincing early lead, despite never having won a rally on tarmac before. But the 307's main problem would soon be uncovered before the end of the first leg. Just before the first service, Grönholm's gearbox failed, leaving him stuck in third gear, costing valuable time and slashing his lead. Worse was still to come too. A few stages later, that now repaired 4-speed gearbox once again hit troubles. The gearbox was set up for acceleration on the tight and twisty roads of southern France, but it was geared too short for the fast sections. Both Peugeots were stuck on the rev limiter in 4th gear. Grönholm lost 30 seconds, and with it his rally lead. Meanwhile, the less powerful 6-speed cars had all the acceleration of the Peugeot at low speeds, plus an extra 2 gears for high speeds. By the end of day 1, Grönholm was the only Peugeot in the points behind the leading Citroën of Sebastian Loeb. Grönholm would end up finishing the rally in 4th position. This was a sign of things to come for the 307. The car often showed flashes of brilliant pace before persistent reliability issues ruined the team's chance of winning. In Sweden, the car's power steering failed, once again handing a win to Citroën's Sebastian Loeb. In Mexico, the power steering failed on Grönholm's car again, whilst Harry Rovanpera's steering arm broke. In New Zealand, Grönholm suffered differential issues whilst battling for the lead. His chances of winning the rally also weren't helped by him testing to see if the car goes faster when it's upside down. He finished 6 seconds off the lead. Without differential issues as well as his impressive display of automotive acrobatics, it's likely he would have won. But the next round in Cyprus was truly remarkable for the Peugeot team and their lead driver, Markus Grönholm. Peter Solberg finished the first stage 1.8 seconds clear of second place Markus Grönholm, with a second Peugeot of Harry Rovanpera in third. Over stages 2 and 3, Solberg increased his lead over Grönholm to around 5 seconds, but on stage 4, all of that changed.
Markus,
no clutch anymore. When I came here, no clutch.
Your time's still pretty good. You're up on Petter on the split, so without a clutch.
I don't care anymore because I have no clutch. So maybe it's finished. Huh?
Grönholm's 307 clutch began to fail, meaning he had to drive cautiously. And as any stall could cost him minutes getting the car restarted without the use of the clutch. However, luckily for Markus, he was not the only driver experiencing issues. Peter Solberg's Subaru had developed a radiator issue. Rocks from the rough roads of Cyprus had blocked the car's radiator, resulting in an overheating engine. Solberg was forced to stop on the stage to fix the issue. Markus Grönholm, despite his clutch issue, was now leading with a big margin. Despite all of the pain of the early season, it seemed that it was finally going well for Peugeot. Grönholm would lead for the rest of the rally, winning by an amazing 50 seconds in the end and taking the championship lead. It seemed the 307 had finally come good. Unfortunately, it was not to be.
The big news in the lead up to this rally has been Markus Grönholm's disqualification from the last round in Cyprus. Celebrations for the Peugeot 307's maiden win cut short because of a non-regulation water pump in the car.
What's the spirit in which are we now? Are we depressed? Are we sad? Are we empty? No, we are disgusted. Will we give up? Never.
The disqualification of both Peugeots meant Sébastien Loeb was ruled to be the winner of the Rally of Cyprus. A third place for Carlos Sainz meant it was yet another double podium for Citroën. That wasn't the only issue for the Peugeot in Cyprus either. The tight and twisty nature of the Cyprus Rally exposed an issue with Peugeot's 4-speed gearbox. The gearbox was intended to reduce the number of gear changes and save time. Peugeot's engineers calculated that every 15 gear changes cost 1 second. Fewer gears should mean fewer gear changes. So how did that work out for them?
He can protect the car, but he can't do anything if the gearbox fails him. Peugeot are the only manufacturer using the 4-speed gearbox, which was designed to be fast on slow and twisty stages.
Exactly. The team's engineers had worked out that the 4-speed gearbox should be less gear changes through the slow corners, and they calculated that every 15 changes loses them 1 second in time.
And you've been looking at the number of gear changes made by the leading 3 drivers.
Yes, on the most twisty stage of this rally, Sébastien Loeb made 426 gear changes with his 6-speed transmission. Marco Martin's Ford made a similar number with his 6-speed gearbox. But Grönholm's 4-speed 307 made 536. That's an incredible 134 more than the Ford. Now, I'm sure that's not what the Peugeot engineers had in mind.
That's over 7 seconds worth of extra gear changes. Fewer gears means bigger ratio gaps. Bigger ratio gaps means the car is often in the wrong gear. The simple idea of fewer gears, fewer changes fell apart in the real-world conditions. A 5-speed gearbox was introduced later on. The rest of Peugeot's season would go very much the same way, with promising rally starts being followed by bitter disappointments, with Peugeot falling apart before the finish line. The 54th running of the Thousand Lakes Rally was set to be a strong rally for the Peugeot team. The powerful, low-drag Peugeot had the highest top speed of any World Rally car at the time, and they had one hell of a driver lineup too. Finnish drivers had dominated their home event, with the majority of the event's winners being Finnish. Peugeot entered 3 cars into the event, with the usual drivers Markus Grönholm and Harry Rovanperä in cars 5 and 6, with Sebastian Lindholm in car 14. With 3 all-Finnish crews in the Rally of Finland, they certainly had the drivers to get the job done. But did they have the car? Harry Rovanperä led the rally in the first 5 stages, with Sebastian Lindholm behind in second. It was a Peugeot 1-2, a dream start for the French team. Markus Grönholm had a relatively slow start, down in 4th place during the first few stages. However, by stage 6, Grönholm had found his way into the lead. Rovanperä and Lindholm would both eventually crash out of the rally, but one Peugeot was still running strong. That Peugeot was the car of Markus Grönholm, who had built up a sizable lead. But just as the Peugeot had finally found its way into a dominant rally lead, trouble once again struck Grönholm's 307.
3 gears! 3 gears! Whole stage! Look at the time! You can tell Corrado now at 3 it's enough!
His gearbox had lost its top gear, leaving him with just 3 gears. Luckily for Peugeot, the driver behind the wheel of the now 3-speed Peugeot was Markus Grönholm, and when Markus is on the pace, there's no stopping him. Despite only having 3 gears and being significantly down on top speed on the fast Finnish roads, Grönholm was 5th on the stage and maintained his overall rally lead, despite more gearbox troubles later on in the rally. Grönholm's Peugeot went on to win the rally by over 30 seconds ahead of Marco Martin and Carlos Sainz. Rally Finland was a high point for the Peugeot team, but it would turn out to be the highest point of the season for the French team. Later rounds of 2004 saw the 307's problems come to a head. A lackluster rally of Germany, with Grönholm crashing out on the first corner and mediocre pace otherwise, would be followed by yet more reliability issues in the Rally of Japan. But what came next was something that Peugeot could have never expected. The Subaru of Peter Solberg won the opening 2 stages of the rally. Sebastian Loeb then won the 3rd stage in his Citroën Zara. The next 2 stages were won by Marcus Grönholm. By the end of day 1, Grönholm was 2nd, 30 seconds behind Peter Solberg, whilst Rovanperä was 6th, having suffered a minor crash earlier in the day. The Peugeot was clearly a strong performer in the Mediterranean rallies. The following day, however, would see Peugeot's fortunes turn. On stage 9, Harry Rovanperä was setting a good pace, but then, once again, the gearbox would fail. Peugeot were bitterly disappointed. Rovanperä would retire on the spot. Marcus Grönholm's Peugeot, feeling left out, decided it would also develop engine issues, leading the car to slow to a crawl. A few kilometres further down the stage, he had lost so much time due to his engine issues that stopping on the stage to ask Rovanperä why he'd also stopped wouldn't have any effect on his rally. The sight of 2 broken Peugeots parked together on the side of the stage would become an embarrassment to the brand and an iconic photo in the history of the World Rally Championship. Solberg would dominate the rest of the rally, winning by 2 minutes. He would be joined by the Citroën drivers Loeb and Sainz on the podium. Grönholm, on the other hand, would finish 7th, 26 minutes behind Solberg. Peugeot's performance would fail to impress at the Tour de Corse, but this one was at least notable a little bit because Peugeot tried out a dual clutch gearbox in the car. This was a very new technology at the time, but it failed. Once again, the pace was also lackluster and Cédric Robert crashed out. Meanwhile, for their rivals over at Citroën, Loeb's 2nd place secured him the first of 9 consecutive World Drivers' Championships, with 2 rounds still to go. The Rally of Spain would, however, be a strong result for Peugeot, with Grönholm securing 2nd place. By the end of the season, Peugeot would be 4th out of the 5 teams in the Manufacturers' Championship, with Sebastian Loeb scoring more points than the entire Peugeot team, despite having 2 capable drivers. By the end of 2004, the Peugeot 307 had clearly failed in the season, but the car's life wasn't over yet. In the WRC, cars generally compete for multiple years before they're replaced, and this was the case for the 307. In 2005, Marco Martin would join the team alongside Marcus Grönholm, so surely this year they could get their reliability in order, right? Well, actually, yes. For 2005, the Peugeots did prove to be reliable. However, unfortunately for Peugeot, they decided that for 2005, they would switch from Michelin tyres to Pirelli tyres, and as it turned out, Pirelli's tyres combined the grip of a greased ice cube with the durability of Play-Doh. Peugeot did actually manage to secure 2nd place in the Constructors' Championship, and this time the team did also manage to be the only team to score more points than Sebastian Loeb. But the damage was done. During 2005, Peugeot's parent company, PSA, announced that Citroën and Peugeot would both leave the championship in 2006. Citroën were only taking a year off to develop the C4 WRC for its debut in 2007, but Peugeot would never return to the top class as a manufacturer team again. Well, at least not yet. Please come back. Peugeot, Citroën, Škoda and Mitsubishi had all left the World Rally Championship at the beginning of 2006. The only remaining manufacturers were Ford and Subaru. This did not mean that there was a lack of cars though. The 2006 season saw many independently run rally teams known as privateers buy the old World Rally cars from the departed manufacturer team and operating them. Suddenly, the World Rally Championship had a multitude of new teams springing up. World champion Sebastian Loeb would join Kronos Racing, driving their newly acquired Citroën Zara. Grönholm would move to the factory Ford team for the launch of the new 2006 spec Ford Focus WRC. Ford would also enter a separate junior team, initially running 2004 spec Focuses. That team would eventually become the current M-Sport team. Škoda remained in the sport, with the newly formed Red Bull Škoda team operating the cars, but the team we're focusing on for 2006 is a French outfit called Bozien Racing. Bozien Racing was a long-term Peugeot privateer, having previously run the 206. For 2006, the team would be branded OMV Peugeot and flagged as Austrian. This team would fill the void left by the Peugeot factory team, fielding two ex-factory cars and legendary privateer entrant Manfred Stoll alongside Peter Solberg's brother, Henning Solberg. The team had changed, the colours had changed, the drivers had changed, but underneath it was still the same 307. So, how did the 307 perform with its new privateer operator? It performed reasonably, but that's all. Bozien Racing did not have the budget of the factory Peugeot team the previous year, and did not contest all rounds in 2006. They also did not receive manufacturer support from Peugeot the way Kronos Racing did from Citroën, as unlike Citroën, Peugeot had no plans to return. That year, it was once again Loeb who would win the title, despite missing the last 4 rounds due to an injury, whilst Manfred Stoll would place 4th in the Drivers' Championship, with Henning Solberg 8th. Ford would take the manufacturer's crown, whilst OMV Peugeot would place 4th. But how about that reliability? Well, by 2006, here's what Manfred Stoll had to say.
I'm quite pleased with the season. A great thanks to the car. We make 16 events, 16 times no retirement on any technical problem. It's unbelievable. I think it's the most reliable car I ever drive in my life.
The 307 was retired from full-time competition at the end of 2006. It would make the occasional one-off appearance sporadically the following years, with its final appearance in the 2010 Rally of France, where it would retire due to mechanical issues. The Peugeot 307 WRC had big boots to fill after the success of its predecessor. Peugeot were aiming their car at beating PSA rivals over at Citroën, but ultimately they never managed to mount a challenge. But was the car a failure? I would say no. It placed second in the 2005 World Rally Championship, it scored numerous podiums, and it had many innovative features that did work, but were held back by horrible reliability, a badly timed switch to Pirelli, and an underfunded privateer effort as the car went out with a whimper in its final full season in the World Rally Championship. The French really do like to do things differently when they're making cars or basically anything. There's some interesting ways how they do even their high-speed rail is very unique. But I once decided that the most French car of all time was one of their rally cars. So how did I come to this conclusion? Well, it's time to find out. What is the most French car of all time? It's an odd question, but I think I've got the answer, and it's not what you're thinking. So, what defines a French car? What makes French cars what they are? Well, to start off with, they're weird. They're complicated, they're often commercially unsuccessful, and they have weird styling. They're usually not enthusiast cars, but they're loved by car enthusiasts anyway due to just how unique they are and the crazy technology they use to make their cars as comfortable as possible. It's hard not to love French cars. They're often very impressive bits of engineering. you can always tell a French car was designed by someone incredibly clever and equally creative. They have ways of coming up with things nobody else has thought of, for the most part because nobody else wanted them. Such as the Renault Twizy, which combines the safety of a motorbike with the acceleration of a pedestrian. Now that is innovation, no other car can do that. But the Renault Twizy is not the most French car of all time, because the most French car of all time needs to have something genius about it, and the Twizy is anything but genius. Perhaps the most French car of all time is the most popular car in France right now, the Renault Clio. If everyone in France is buying it, surely it must be very French. But no. You see, let's have a quick look at this car here. This is the latest Mitsubishi Colt, a Japanese car. But hang on a second, why does the bonnet have that strange shape cut into it? Ah, that is where the Renault badge goes, because the Mitsubishi Colt is actually a rebadged Renault Clio. But if you didn't know this, you'd see the Mitsubishi Colt and you'd say, that's a Japanese car. The most French car of all time needs to look unmistakably French. It needs to look so French that it still looks French if you put a Mitsubishi badge on it. Perhaps the Renault 4 is the most French car of all time. It certainly looks very weird in a French way, but it's technologically just too conventional to be the most French car of all time. Its only quirk is its asymmetric wheelbase due to the use of torsion bar suspension and the fact that for some reason they were still making it in 1994. But we're definitely getting closer. The Renault 4 came after the Renault 4 CV, which is quite similar sounding to 2CV. Of course, the Citroën 2CV. Is the Citroën 2CV the most French car of all time though? Well, it is extremely weird in many ways. It looks weird, the engine sounds weird, it's got a weird gearbox, and the suspension was really weird. It had a single spring for both the front and the rear that was shared, which meant it had independent suspension from the left to the right side, but non-independent suspension from the front to the rear. The CV in 2CV stands for cheval, the French word for horse. The true English translation of the deux chevaux name would be to call it the 2 horsepower. They called it the 2 horsepower because it has 9 horsepower. How French is that? Not only that, but it was innovative that they managed to build a car so cheap. Post-war Europe was a poor place and they needed a cheap car, although its design does date before World War II. When the Nazis invaded France, Citroën buried the 2CV prototypes to hide them and ensure they could not use the 2CV for military purposes. The prototype that they buried was even weirder. It only had one headlight and had a hand-cranked starter. 27 years after the first car with an electric starter was produced. The 2CV was what got France moving after World War II. In fact, they were still making it up until 1990. Who in the world bought a brand new Citroën 2CV in 1990? They needed a disorder named after them. But the fact that it was sold until 1990 was because of the same reason I can't call the 2CV the most French car of all time. The reason being that it was commercially highly successful. And French cars are famous for being technologically genius cars that nobody buys. And for that, the 2CV is not the most French car of all time. So, if the 2CV isn't the most French car of all time, what is? Could it be the Citroën DS? It came from the same designer as the 2CV, and it got its own crazy quirks. It's good looking, but definitely weird. As well as in the styling department, it has some very weird features on the inside. The steering wheel has a single spoke, the indicators are on a single rocker switch, and for some reason the handbrake applies to the front wheels instead of the rears because the wheelbase is adjustable. But it's not the quirks and the weirdness that makes the Citroën DS famous. Well, that's part of it. What it's famous for is innovation. When it came out in 1955, a time when almost half of all Australian households didn't have an indoor toilet, a time when passenger jet travel was not available because all the comets were grounded, a time when people thought that selling toy atomic energy labs to children with real radioactive material was a good idea and that hiding under a desk would help you survive a nuclear war. So with that in mind, what sort of features did the Citroën DS have? Well, to start off with, it had a monocoque chassis, just like a modern car, with crumple zones and an engine that would drop under the car in a crash, something most cars didn't have until the 1970s or 80s. It had a semi-automatic gearbox, meaning you didn't have to use the clutch, but it still had fuel efficiency of a manual gearbox. It had power-assisted braking and steering, and later models got headlights that would turn as you turn the steering wheel, and it came on radial tyres right from the start. But its most important innovation was with the suspension, because it had something called hydropneumatic suspension. Instead of springs or air suspension, it used a liquid and a gas, hence the name, hydropneumatic. The springs were replaced with spheres, with a sheet of rubber in the middle. Below the sheet was hydraulic fluid, and above was nitrogen gas. Gases are compressible, liquids are not. When the car's suspension would be compressed suddenly by a bump, the fluid would be pushed up into the gas, causing the gas to compress. When this would happen, the change in pressure would force the hydraulic fluid out of the sphere and re-level the car. But since it's not compressible, this would only happen slowly, causing the spring to return in a much more gentle manner. The opposite would occur when the spring extends from a dip in the road. But when the car went around a corner, the rolling force from cornering is much more gradual than the shock force from hitting the bump. So the hydraulic fluid would be able to flow into the sphere in time before the gas is compressed. The result is that the car would have no roll in the corners basically, whilst also being extremely smooth and comfortable on the bumps. And the best part, it did all of this with no computerization or electronics. It was entirely a mechanical system. It also allowed for manual height adjustment by the driver whilst the car is in motion. And the car was so stable with this suspension that it could drive on 3 wheels. French President Charles de Gaulle was being driven in one when a group of far-right nationalists, angered by him pulling out of Algeria, attempted to assassinate him, shooting at his car and taking out multiple tyres. He survived, and the car continued to drive despite the loss of its tyres. This suspension design was made out of necessity. Roads in post-war France were in shocking condition, and they needed suspension that could deal with such roads without compromising high-speed stability. Much of the French ingenuity in their cars came from necessity. They even showed this ingenuity during World War II. Under Nazi occupation, Citroën boss Pierre-Jules Boulanger made Citroën's employees put the notch on the oil dipsticks for Citroën trucks in the wrong place, causing the engines to not have enough oil and fail spectacularly. This was just one of many tactics the French used under Nazi occupation that made the country infuriating to hold on to. As a tribute to this, they made sure to include catastrophic engine failure as a feature of all their future passenger cars to this day. It was this sort of genius that led to unconventional thought processes that made the Citroën DS the most innovative car the world has ever seen. But there is a problem with the Citroën DS. It was also a massive commercial success, just like the 2CV. But also, to find what's truly the most French car of all time, we need to think the way a Frenchman would think. The Citroën DS is too much of an obvious choice. Picking something iconic and easy to think of would be the Australian way of answering this question. A Frenchman would surely come up with a far more creative and unconventional answer rather than the car everyone thinks of when they think of French cars. And that brings me on to what's actually the most French car of all time. In 1982, Citroën released the BX. It was not a direct successor of the DS, being a mid-sized car rather than a large car, but it had many of the same technologies but modernised, such as having a more refined hydropneumatic suspension than its predecessors and having plastics on the interior. However, one thing that reviewers often noted about Citroëns throughout the brand's history is that they never had much in the way of high performance. Citroens could corner flat, but that's where the performance ended. They lacked feel and were all front-wheel drive. After all, it was Citroën who were the first to sell a front-wheel drive car. Citroens were comfortable cars, but they weren't known for driver engagement. They needed to change their image and show that big Citroens could be fun and interesting cars to drive. They needed to go rallying, and that's exactly what they did, bringing a car to the World Rally Championship in the top class, complying with the most overrated set of motorsport regulations in history, Group B. In order to comply with Group B rules, they needed to create 200 homologation specials of the car. They wished to The advantage of using a homologation special is that it allows you to completely change the car from the road-going model and put features in the car that wouldn't normally sell well on the road. But the head of Citroën Sport, Guy Verrier, clearly didn't get the memo because he decided to keep as much of the regular road car as possible in the homologation special to compare. Let's look at the Peugeot 205 T16. Peugeot had recently bought Citroën, so the cars should surely have a similar design philosophy. The T16 looked vaguely like the regular 205, but shared almost nothing with a regular car. It was an innovative machine that brought the idea of making a silhouette car that looks a bit like an ordinary hatchback but has nothing to do with a road car into rallying. Before this, they either used sports coupes as the basis, or they used regular passenger cars and capitalised on their sturdiness over the sports cars. The T16 had a mid-engine layout and composite bodywork and a space frame chassis. This all meant it was extremely light and nimble. The Citroën BX4TC, on the other hand, retained its longitudinal front engine, which meant that the engine had to be pushed forward to accommodate the all-wheel drive system behind the engine, giving it a worse weight distribution than the original Audi Quattro. Much like the Quattro, it also lacked a centre differential, giving it very poor low-speed manoeuvrability and was not capable of performing handbrake turns. The large, double-element rear wing made plenty of downforce, and its higher mounting and more sloped rear window meant the wing was quite efficient too, but the lack of front aero devices meant that the downforce was almost all at the rear, giving the car poor high-speed manoeuvrability, but with the benefit of greater stability. The car retained its standard steel chassis, giving it a weight of 1,150 kilograms, more than any other manufacturer-backed Group B car in 1986. The engine's power output was also not significantly increased. The engine produced just 380 horsepower, making it the least powerful factory-backed Group B car in 1986, giving it by far the worst power-to-weight ratio. In fact, the engine still used a cast-iron block and didn't use double overhead cams. The only good thing about the BX4TC that it did feature was its hydropneumatic suspension. The ability to keep all four wheels contacting the road whilst also having very little body roll and instant adjustability is a huge benefit in rallying that would help claw back the disadvantage the car had from its heavy weight, low power output, lack of centre differential, poor weight distribution, and aerodynamic imbalance. You really have to question the sanity of Citroën's engineers when they decided to enter a car that's so clearly outmatched by the competition. Showing up in the 1986 World Rally Championship with a Citroën BX4TC be like showing up at the Battle of Normandy armed with a tablespoon. The car may have been competitive had it been entered in 1982 instead of 1986, since the long wheelbase Quattros also had many of the same issues with the drivetrain layout, but without better suspension. But entering in 1986, when the whole field other than Audi were silhouette cars, makes you really wonder what exactly they were thinking. But there's no denying the BX4TC is by far the most unique rally car to have been entered officially by a manufacturer in the top class. It was weirdly innovative with the suspension, but completely outdated with the chassis and engine, and the transmission. So how did it perform? The car was entered in 2 championships, the World Rally Championship and the French Gravel Rally Championship. I'll start with the French Gravel Rally Championship. In Rallye de la Première Terre, both cars retired. In Rallye Terre de Provence, both cars retired. In Rallye Ronde de la Découverte, both cars retired. And in Rallye Terre de Charente, Oliver Tabaton finished 10th and François Chauche retired. So, not so good in the National Championship, but what about the World Rally Championship? Well, in Rally Monte Carlo, Philippe Wamberg's hydraulic system failed, leading to the suspension failing. Jean-Claude André's car didn't fail, but Jean-Claude André himself did, crashing out on stage 7, the car's tricky handling getting the better of him. The following rally of Sweden would see a BX4TC actually finish the rally and take 6th place, the car's first ever points finish. But it was clear that the car was entirely uncompetitive and outclassed in every conceivable way. Citroën decided to miss the next few rounds of the championship in order to work on the car more. They made their return in Rally Acropolis. The FIA's historic database shows that Citroën made homologation changes to the brakes, steering, and suspension. All of these are on the same hydraulic system, so it's most likely that they made changes to the hydraulic system. They also replaced all the body panels with ones made from Kevlar to save weight. The result was a faster car, but it still retained the steel chassis and the lack of a centre diff. The other issue was the hydropneumatic suspension that had shorter travel than the coil springs of their competitors, meaning that although it was perfect for small bumps, on larger bumps the suspension would bottom out, giving the Citroën actually quite a rough ride at higher speeds on harsher bumps. Unsurprisingly, none of the 3 BX4TCs they entered in the Rally of Acropolis actually finished. That would be the end of the Citroën BX4TC's appearance in the World Rally Championship. Citroën would leave the top class of the sport, not to return until 2002. More on that later in the video. The road-going BX4TC homologation cars also had reliability issues. In fact, they were deemed to be so bad that they were an embarrassment to the Citroën brand, with the company buying them back from the owners and scrapping them. That being said, there are still some surviving BX4TC homologation cars on the road today. But why do I think the BX4TC is the most French car of all time? Well, it had some really clever technology with the hydropneumatic suspension, which could prove advantageous in many situations. And if they could work out how to get some longer travel into their hydropneumatic system, it would be vastly superior to coil springs in all metrics other than weight. But despite the genius technology in it, the car featured design choices that made absolutely no sense, and its homologation special was a complete commercial failure, not to mention how bizarre both the rally car and the road car looked, with the enormous front overhang of course. The BX4TC is not the obvious choice for the most French car in the world, and if there's any common pattern in all these cars, it's that the French never picked the obvious answer. And for that, the Citroën BX4TC is the most French car of all time. But we can't leave it at that, because the BX4TC has some legacy. Citroën remained in rallying with a Visa, and then the AX, and eventually the Saxo in the lower classes, but they retained the hopes of returning to the top class of the World Championship one day. Then, in 2002, they did exactly that, producing one of the most dominant cars in the history of any motorsport ever. Fitted with active suspension and four-wheel drive with a highly advanced active transmission system and unparalleled reliability, the Citroën Zara World Rally car was a name to be feared in rallying throughout the 2000s, winning 11 of the 16 rounds in the 2005 World Rally Championship. The car was so well engineered that it was getting podiums as late as 2009, 4 years after factory support and development ceased for the car. The Zara was replaced officially in 2007 by the equally dominant C4, which was then replaced by the DS3 for 2011, which won the 2011 and 2012 Drivers' and Manufacturers' Championship. Overall, Citroën won the Constructors' Championship from 2003 until 2005, followed by 2008 until 2012, whilst Sébastien Loeb won every Drivers' Championship from 2004 until 2012. Absolute domination. So, although the BX4TC was a complete failure in every conceivable way, it didn't stop Citroën from coming back and having a second shot at it 16 years later and achieving absolute perfection. And you know, they're not the only brand who's come back to the WRC after initially failing and achieving good results. So, what's the other brand, and how was their first attempt? When you think of Korea, the good one that is, what is the first thing that comes to mind? K-pop? Samsung? Kimchi? That weird attempted military coup they tried and then failed with last week? Well, for many people, it's Hyundai. They're a titan of the global car industry with an enormous market share and an improving reputation. But there haven't always been a brand that normal people with brains would actually consider buying.
For that you get, well, it's like a car really, only not quite as good.
Go back 20 years and Hyundais were horrible cars in every single way. Hyundais were known for being cheap cars that had nothing in the way of reliability, comfort, performance, styling, safety, or practicality. But they wanted to get a piece of the lucrative European car market, which meant they needed to step up their game, and to show off their engineering skills, they decided to try their hand at the World Rally Championship with a second generation Hyundai Accent. Hang on, I thought this was a video about a 2000s World Rally car. Why are you starting the story in 1953? Are you an idiot? Well, yes, I am, but I promise you this is relevant and necessary to mention in the story of the Hyundai Accent World Rally car. You see, Hyundai can be seen as a company that grew up along with its country, and the origins of Hyundai and the state of South Korea throughout much of the 20th century is vital to the decisions they'd make half a century later, and the Hyundai company we know today. After the war, both halves of Korea were ruined by the intense conflict. Korea was an impoverished country in the north and the south. As wars end, things are rebuilt and put back together and economies recover. But for a long time, even well after the war, South Korea remained a poor country. And to make matters worse, although the South was saved from the horrors of communism, it was not saved from the horrors of authoritarianism and dictatorships. In fact, still by 1970, South Korea's GDP per capita was less than that of North Korea. Such was the head start the North was given, and a stark contrast to today when the South is one of the world's most advanced economies and the North is comparable economically to Somalia. But it was in this impoverished version of South Korea that a company known as Hyundai Motor Company was founded. Hyundai Motor Company was a subsidiary of the larger Hyundai Group, founded in 1948. Hyundai Group was what's known as a chaebol, which is a term for a large South Korean family-controlled conglomerate that owns industries in seemingly everything. In the corruption of early South Korea, it was much easier for companies to gain enormous market dominance within the country without the checks and balances that most advanced free market economies have. And this let Hyundai grow massively within Korea. But it's also why chaebols are a controversial topic, as they basically control the whole country, leading to situations like children studying 15 hours per day. So, Hyundai was a new car company in the late 1960s, and they got big within Korea just as Korean economic growth was starting to take off. But remember, Korea was still poor. The average Australian in 1960 earned 20 times more per year than the average South Korean. People didn't associate South Korea with K-pop and kimchi back then. They associated it with images like this. So it's no surprise that the cars coming out of South Korea were made cheaply. Rather than going through the costs of actually designing a new car from scratch, Hyundai decided it would be easier to build Ford Cortinas under license instead. They would eventually design their own car in the 70s, and by design I mean they bought the platform and engines from Mitsubishi, stuck some bits from a Ford Cortina on it, and then got the former manager and director of Morris to oversee it, and then outsourced the external design work to an Italian company by the name of Ital Design, with their famous designer Giorgetto Giugiaro designing the car, which meant that they didn't really design any part of it whatsoever, but the result was certainly not the worst car in the world. They'd worked out the best way to save money when designing a car is to simply not design it, which is why it was actually a good looking car. The Hyundai Pony was the first car to see Hyundai branding, but really it was just a Mitsubishi Lancer with an Italian styled body on top and significantly worse reliability. But Hyundai was a company that grew up with its country, and as Korea began to grow out of poverty and into development as the military junta was replaced with a democratic government, Hyundai had also finally grown big enough to design a car of their own without having Mitsubishi taking their bite out of the profit margin of each car they produced. The company had grown, and now it was finally time to see the first ever true Hyundai. Prepare yourself for the amazing Hyundai Accident. Okay, so it looked terrible, drove terribly, performed horribly in crash tests, had reliability issues, wasn't comfortable, and if anyone caught you driving one, you'd be mocked for the rest of your days. But it was, finally, a fully Korean-designed and made car, with no pesky Mitsubishi licenses to pay for or Ford Cortina parts bin specials. This was a country 20 years earlier that looked like this, that was now designing a car from scratch. It may have been a complete pile of shit, but it was an impressive pile of shit. Just remember, when this thing came out, when you said South Korea, many people still had images like this come to mind, and yet the country that looks like this had now just managed to make a car on their own. In 1999, they updated the Hyundai Accident, with the lead designer given the strict instruction to make sure it was even more ugly than the previous car, and the designers did an amazing job at achieving this goal. Hyundai at this time was a complete joke. Nobody in their right mind would buy one. They needed to fix their reputation and make the brand a little bit cooler. Over in Europe, a car company from another formerly poor, now rapidly modernising country, Škoda, had entered their Octavia in the World Rally Championship, and although it wasn't successful, it was absolutely loved by viewers of the World Rally Championship. In fact, it's so loved that it is the video I made on the Octavia that's the most watched video on this channel. When Dirtfish ran a poll for favourite World Rally car of all time, the Octavia World Rally car won by a huge margin. In fact, I personally loved this car so much that when I discovered that Dirtfish accidentally made it so you could vote as many times as you want, I voted for the Octavia over 100 times, which probably contributed to it winning, along with a certain Facebook group also discovering the same thing at the same time. With the love the fans had for the Škoda in mind, and the need to improve the brand's reputation and recognition, since many people in Europe had never even heard of Hyundai at this time, they made the call. It was time to go rallying. Development on the Hyundai Accident World Rally car began in 1999, with the car's debut season being 2000. Hyundai tasked the British company Motorsport Developments with the engineering of the car. That sounds like a relatively reputable sounding company, but they weren't a big titan of motorsport engineering like M-Sport, ProDrive or Orica. They were much smaller and didn't have the biggest resume in terms of cars they'd worked on. Still, they were reasonably competent. Hyundai would debut with a solid driver lineup for 2000. Car 14 would be driven by Kenneth Eriksson, a driver who'd won 6 World Rallies and placed 3rd on the 1995 World Drivers' Championship, only behind the generational legends Carlos Sainz and Colin McRae. He also won the Asia Pacific Rally Championship 3 times, and in 1986, Kenneth Eriksson managed to finish in the points twice in his Group A Golf GTI Mark II against the most powerful Group B cars on his way to winning the Group A Class World Rally Championship that year. In the left seat of car 15 would sit another notable driver, Alistair McRae. Although he's most famous for being the brother to Colin McRae, he's a fast rally driver in his own right. He'd go on to win the Asia Pacific Rally Championship in 2011, beating Aussie legend Chris Atkinson, albeit mostly because Atco didn't attend 2 of the 5 rounds. Still, Alistair had plenty of pace. The drivers could certainly not be blamed for anything the car was lacking. It was time. After developing the Hyundai Accent into a World Rally beast, the car was now on its debut. They missed the first round in Monte Carlo, but a round 2 debut is not the end of the world. Conditions in Sweden would be tough. The snowfall was less than expected, and the studded tyres would take a beating as a result. You know what else would take a beating? Hyundai's pace. Alistair McRae was only 15th on stage 1. Meanwhile, Kenneth Eriksson had issues, which meant he finished stage 1 all the way down in 34th position. Things wouldn't improve on the second stage either, with Kenneth Eriksson dropping down to 41st position. For much of the rest of the rally, as the cameras focused on the leading pack of Marcus Grönholm, Tommy Mäkinen and Thomas Rodström, the Hyundais languished outside the top 10. But towards the end, their pace did see a minor improvement, with Kenneth Eriksson setting the 5th fastest time on stage 15. But this would not be enough to improve his position into the top 10. By the end of the rally, Eriksson was 13th, with McRae 14th. This wasn't great. The Hyundai Accent, though, was a brand new car. It wasn't expected to win a rally straight out of the gate. Rally cars always take a few rounds to iron out the creases and become fast. Things would improve for Hyundai though. The team would soon score its first points in the Rally of Argentina, but the most notable rally of the year for the Hyundai Accent came in the land down under. Coming into the Rally of Australia, expectations were not high for the Hyundai team. They had not done anything notable yet, and they didn't expect anything notable either. The car was still effectively in a development season. Stage 1, the super special stage in Perth CBD, led to predictable performance for the Hyundai Accents. Alistair McRae would go 13th fastest, while Kenneth Eriksson would set the 14th fastest time. The good news was that the super special stages are short, and a low ranking time will not lose significant overall time in the rally, which was good news for the following forest stages as the rally proper would get underway. Stage 2 is where things would change for Hyundai. Kenneth Eriksson would set the 2nd fastest stage time, an amazing performance that would see his overall ranking skyrocket up to 3rd place. Suddenly, Hyundai were in the podium places. Alistair McRae, meanwhile, had some issues on stage 2, which meant he only set the 27th fastest time. But on stage 3, he too was setting lightning fast times. He'd go 3rd fastest on stage 3, beating his brother driving the formidable Ford Focus World Rally car. This would see Alistair McRae climb 10 places from 27th overall to 17th place. Meanwhile, Kenneth Eriksson failed to keep up the pace he had on stage 2, setting only the 12th fastest time on stage 3 and dropping all the way down to 7th. As a result, outside the points paying positions. But the Rally of Australia is a long rally, and Hyundai were ready to fight back. they were beginning to show some of the fighting spirits that they would become famous for in the modern World Rally Championship. Alistair McRae would continue to fight his way up the timing sheets over the next few stages. Meanwhile, Kenneth Eriksson would again set an impressive second fastest time on the 5th stage of the rally, climbing back up to 6th place, and back in the points once more. But this high was short-lived. Lackluster pace on the next couple of stages would see the leading Hyundai Accent drop back to 8th position, and once again out of the points. But on stage 9, something miraculous would happen. As Kenneth Eriksson threw his bargain basement budget banger of a Hyundai through the stage at breakneck speeds, he was really getting into the swing of things. He was at one with the car. He was flying out there, and he would set the fastest stage time of all on the 9th stage down under. A stage win, a real miracle for Hyundai. But once again, this was a short-lived high, as Eriksson was handed a 40-second time penalty. This meant that Eriksson was dropped to 10th place. By the end of day 1, the Hyundais were in 10th and 11th. But Kenneth wasn't going to give up. He was determined to let the swings and roundabouts continue, and on the first stage of the second leg, he would set the 4th fastest time. The following stages continued the trend of impressive pace for the Swede, and by stage 14, the Hyundai pairing were improving their spots. Kenneth Eriksson was up to 7th place, and Alistair McRae was in 9th. Only a few things needed to change and they'd be getting a double points finish. But on stage 15, disaster struck. Alistair McRae touched the bank on the inside of a corner. This broke the suspension of his Hyundai Accent, and his rally was over. The good news for Hyundai though was that the leading car was still in the rally, and still going strong. On the stage that Alistair McRae retired, Kenneth Eriksson would set the 4th fastest time. This would see him move into 6th place. Hyundai were once again back in the points paying positions, and Kenneth wasn't done yet. On stage 16, he would once again win the stage, elevating him position to 5th overall. This would be where he'd stay until the end of the rally, but things were not as they seemed. Tommi Mäkinen managed to finish 3rd place in his Mitsubishi, but the scrutineers found that his car's turbo was not compliant with the technical regulations. Mäkinen was subsequently disqualified. This gave Kenneth Eriksson 4th place, Hyundai's best finish yet. So far, it seemed like a really strong first season for Hyundai. They didn't compete in all the rounds, but they did actually manage to beat the Octavia. It seemed like the Hyundai Accent had actually got some potential. But as 2001 rolled around, the car wasn't improved, with Hyundai now finishing dead last in the manufacturer's standings. The same story would again happen in 2002, with the Korean brand again seeing poor performance. The poor performance wouldn't stop during 2003 either. In fact, even by 2003, Australia 2000 was probably the only time the Hyundai Accent ever did anything interesting other than crashing into something. With the performance still atrocious, halfway through 2003, Hyundai decided they'd had enough and pulled the plug on the program. This resulted in the company developing the car, Motorsport Developments, forced to fire 100 workers as a result of this sudden withdrawal from Hyundai. The car's lack of improvement in performance may have been because the car itself was structurally limited by the road-going chassis it's limited on. It's a homologation series after all, and just compare the crash tests of the Hyundai Accent to any other car that featured in the World Rally Championship at the time. It has visibly less chassis rigidity, and you can't develop your way out of a floppy chassis in a homologation category. You've got to use the road-based chassis, and if that sucks, no amount of development's going to get you out of it other than changing the car. Hyundai also didn't put much budget towards the team compared to other manufacturers, which also contributed to their poor performance. But there is a bigger question. This Hyundai and the Škoda Octavia, both cars performed similarly, but one of them is forgotten and the other one is loved to this day. Why did the Octavia get all the love and the Hyundai forgotten? I think there's a few reasons for this. One is that the Octavia had personality. It was the Czech tank. It was amazingly strong, it was big and heavy, yet it was still pushed to its absolute limit. The Hyundai Accent was a smaller car than the Octavia. It was one of the smaller cars at the time. It wasn't unique in any way, it was just another car. Another reason is the country of origin. Rallying is very popular in Czechia, so it gets a lot of love from its home country. There's a reason that Czechia makes up a significant portion of this channel's viewers. South Korea, on the other hand, was never a nation with a long history of rallying, so it doesn't have the love from its home country. Another reason it doesn't have home country love like the Octavia is the chaebol bit mentioned earlier. Remember how I said they're somewhat controversial? Well, many South Koreans hate the chaebols because they're often referred to as essentially owning the country. Hyundai is the second biggest chaebol behind Samsung and controls 10% of Korea's GDP. Korea is known as the Samsung Republic for a reason, and many people in Korea don't like these companies because of that. Although many also love them for their role in making South Korea rich. But still, being from a controversial company means that the people from the home country of that company are less likely to support it as much. 20 years ago, Hyundai had a terrible reputation. They were a joke. The cars were rubbish, they looked terrible, and they drove terribly, and they had an awful safety record. But since the bad old days of the 2000s, Hyundai as a company has massively improved their reputation, building cars that are better to drive and a whole lot better to look at. Hyundai were finally making cars that you could be seen driving without everyone laughing at you. Well, look who's laughing now. Hyundai is a huge name, a name that strikes fear into competing car manufacturers and carries the weight of one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world. By the early 2010s, Hyundai had arrived, and they were ready to show the world that they were not the laughingstock company they were 10 years ago. Hyundai's story is a unique one within the motoring history, a company that's gone from a laughingstock to a reputable brand. Producing good cars is not something that happens often. The only other one I can think of is Škoda. Very often, the opposite happens where reputable brands start producing rubbish, like this thing. That's what makes Hyundai's story so interesting, and their transition from rubbish to reputable, from failed to fantastic, wasn't just happening on the road. It was happening on the rally stages too. Time to find out what happens when the engineers eat their N cereal.
Close your eyes.
Hyundai left the World Rally Championship abruptly during 2003. This is because the car they entered at the time was a complete pile of shit. But now Hyundai actually knew how to make cars. They decided to have a second try at this whole rallying thing they did earlier. This time, they'd keep the program in-house rather than outsourcing, with a team's factory to be located in Alzenau, Germany. After 9 years out of the sport, Hyundai released this rendering of an i20 World Rally car. The new WRC 1.6 regulations suited smaller cars, and the new i20 looks good from the front. Shame about the rear. Regardless of the questionable rear-end aesthetics, the car was a serious proposal, and it was time to get testing. The sun is shining over the gravel roads of Portugal. The wind turbines tower over these roads, but beneath them is Brian Bouffier, Hyundai's test driver, and he's here to evaluate the car. Hyundai is conducting a shakedown test today. This is a test that involves taking the car to a stage, driving it flat out for a bit, and then checking to see that everything actually works. For the team, this is a vital stage. Although they aren't testing for performance, if something goes wrong, it could suggest there's an issue with their design or manufacturing, and the whole project could be delayed. Tensions are high for the Hyundai team. The pressure is on to find out if their World Rally car is running as it should be. But then, delightment. The car runs flawlessly, and now the team can move on to performance testing. They would later have to run the same process for their tarmac spec car, again with a shakedown followed by performance testing. Once the initial tests were done, it was getting closer to 2014.
A new season, and for the second year running we welcome a new team with the return of Hyundai.
Of course, this will be a really important moment for Hyundai Motorsport.
Hyundai had announced their driver lineup for 2014. Thierry Neuville would drive full-time, whilst the other car would be filled by various part-time drivers across different events, predominantly Danny Sordo, along with Chris Atkinson, Juho Hänninen and Brian Bouffier. Thierry Neuville was especially exciting. He was a driver who'd come up through the Citroën Junior Driver Program. This was a program that produced Sébastien Loeb, the 9-time World Rally Champion, and Sébastien Ogier, the driver who had won the previous World Championship in 2013 in dominant style with the Volkswagen Polo R. And let's talk about the Polo R for a second, because that's what Hyundai would be up against. In 2013, it won all but 3 rounds, and finished on the podium in all but 1, with its worst ever result being 5th place. Sébastien Ogier dominated the World Championship, squashing the hopes and dreams of anyone who wanted a world champion not named Sébastien for the first time since 2003. But they did not score a 1-2 in the World Drivers' Championship, because driving an M Sport Fiesta was a man named Thierry Neuville, who took 2nd place in the 2013 World Drivers' Championship, and now he'd be at Hyundai. They weren't just taking any drivers they could find, they were hunting down the big names. In the other car wasn't just any old fella either. Danny Sordo only had 1 victory so far, yet he was always held in high regard. Constantly stuck in the shadow of Sébastien Loeb as Citroën's number 2 driver, the Spaniard, also a product of Citroën's Junior Driver Program, was always near the front of the field, although couldn't always reach the very top. He was not going to make life easy for the other drivers. It was time for Hyundai and their i20 to make their debut. The Rally of Monte Carlo is an absurdly difficult rally, as it consists of dry tarmac and ice, often on the same stage. This means that the surface with the absolute most traction and the surface with the absolute least traction are together, and it can very quickly change from one to the other. Tyres are always a compromise, with tarmac snow tyres being a more intermediate option than the full snow tyres used on gravel snow events, and if you get on the ice on dry weather tyres, as is often the case, your top speed may be in the single digits. Stage 1 got underway. Car number 1, Sébastien Ogier, would be the first to enter the stage as he was the world champion. He'd set the 3rd fastest time in his Polo. Next into the stage would be Thierry Neuville. The road order for the first stage of the first round determined by the previous year's championship. Neuville got underway, but almost as quickly as his rally started, it ended.
Difficult start for us with the new team, the new car. This morning, first stage, we went off on very difficult conditions with slick tires on the ice. We were a bit too quick in a very small right-hand corner, but fast corner. And
luckily, Hyundai had another car, with Danny Sordo seated on the inside of it. This is because it'd be weird if he was sitting on the outside of it. On stage 1, Sordo was only 11th. but with the tricky conditions, he was happy just to even finish the stage. Stage 2 was a better stage for Sordo. The 4th fastest time saw him rise up to 6th overall. Stage 3 would be another improvement. Unpredictable conditions would see rally leader Robert Kubica lose a minute and a half and would shake up the whole leaderboard. This meant that despite only setting the 5th fastest time, Dani Sordo was now in 3rd position overall. Hyundai's test driver Brian Bouffier, driving a Ford on this event, however, was leading, proving that even the test driver in Hyundai's lineup was a solid choice. On stage 4, Sordo would go faster, setting the 2nd fastest time, and with Ogier a minute behind and the i20 in the podium places, it was looking perfect for Hyundai on debut, despite losing a car. But as Sordo finished stage 4, not all was well. The alternator had failed. Before he could make it to stage 5, his battery was flat. The engine would not start, and his rally was over. Hyundai recorded a double retirement on their debut with the i20. On paper, not a good start, but the car showed heaps of potential. Dani Sordo was fighting for a podium before his alternator decided to stop alternating, and Thierry Neuville, well, he didn't even manage to set a split time, so it's not exactly clear what his pace was, but he was Thierry Neuville, so it can assume the pace would be promising. The following event in Sweden was an event to forget for the Hyundai team, because Thierry Neuville did this, and Juha Hänninen did that. 2 rounds in, and Hyundai still hadn't finished yet. Their next hope was the Rally of Mexico. The previous year's Rally of Mexico was the event where Thierry Neuville got his first ever podium finish, and Thierry Neuville was excited for the event once more. In the other Hyundai for this round would be the Australian driver Chris Atkinson. Atco made his stunning debut to the World Rally Championship in 2004 driving a production spec Subaru. He managed to finish 5th in that production car, catching the eye of the Subaru team, who gave him a drive in the World Rally Championship. After initially struggling with a strong urge to drive into every ditch he could see in his early WRC career, Atco became a highly consistent, reliable and fast driver for Subaru. In fact, he was offered a drive with Citroën at the end of 2008, replacing Dani Sordo, but declined, only for his team, Subaru, to then leave the sport suddenly due to the global financial crisis. Atco was a solid driver, so once more Hyundai would carry a strong driver lineup. Stage 1. The super special stage would not go well for Atco though. An issue meant he only set the 23rd fastest time, but for Neuville things would go better. 6th fastest, a solid start for the Belgian. The following stage would see Neuville drop down to 8th place, and Chris Atkinson would have issues with his anti-lag system, costing him further time. Stage 4 would see further problems for Chris Atkinson, with his rear suspension failing, costing even more time. Atco was out of the top 10, with the issues he faced. Meanwhile, Neuville was still running in 8th place. The 16 kilometres of the Las Minas stage on its second pass, the 8th stage of the rally, would see Thierry Neuville climb to 6th place overall, by setting the 5th fastest time and being aided by Chris Meek going off. The rally was starting to show its colours as a rally of attrition. Mikko Hirvonen and Andreas Mikkelsen had also gone off. Stage 10, the super special stage once more, would see Thierry Neuville set the 2nd fastest time. This would elevate him to 5th position. By the end of the first day, the Hyundai pairing of Neuville and Atco were in 5th and 8th. Even better, Neuville was just 1.5 seconds behind the Welshman Elfyn Evans in his M Sport Ford Fiesta. This was now a battle of fine margins. Every second would count for the duo locked in the battle for 4th place. And for Evans, he took the upper hand on the first stage of the following day, beating out Neuville by 1.5 seconds to double his lead to 3 seconds. But the following stage would be the 53.7 kilometre long or Tartes stage, the longest stage in the World Rally Championship. A perfect place to make some big gains. Neuville set the 4th fastest time, 14.1 seconds faster than Elvin Evans. But things got even better for the Belgian. Citroen's Mikko Hirvonen damaged his suspension. He couldn't repair it and his rally was over, vacating the 2nd spot to make a VW 1-2. But more importantly for this story, Thierry Neuville was now 3rd. As the stages rolled by, Neuville's lead over Evans continued to extend. Not even a small brake issue could stop him. On the final stage, he crossed the line to take 3rd place, the first ever podium for Hyundai, with Chris Atkinson in 7th position. A strong rally for Hyundai, but it wasn't over yet because the rally doesn't actually end at the final stage. They still have to drive along the public road to the rally's official end at the service park. And Thierry Neuville's i20 had a radiator leak. If he doesn't repair the radiator, the car will overheat and he'd be forced to retire from the rally, forfeiting his 3rd place. It was dramatic scenes at the roadside as Neuville frantically worked to repair the car. Some spectators handed him a bottle of beer from the event sponsor, which I can't name because YouTube would put a misinformation label on the video if I name the company. With the car filled with beer, Neuville drove the car to the service park to claim his 3rd place. The Hyundai i20 would take more points finishes over the next few rounds, with an acceptable reliability record too, although nobody could match the domination of the VW Polo Rs. The impeccable reliability, amazing pace and incredible driver lineup made the Polos simply unmatchable. There was only one round in the previous year, 2013, when VW didn't have a podium finish, and that was Rally Deutschland. And because I know a lot of people are going to ask why I called it that when I'm speaking English, it's because rallying has a bit of an odd tradition where rallies are sometimes given names in their local language rather than the language you're speaking. And it was one of these unusually named rallies, and also the home rally for Volkswagen Motorsports team that was their trouble spot the previous year. Coming into Rally Deutschland, Volkswagen were looking unbeatable. Yeah, sure, they didn't win it last year, but they had the best car and one of the greatest drivers of all time at the wheel. The car had no flaws, no issues to exploit. It was a perfect harmony of man and machine. If that wasn't enough of an issue, there was another team looking strong as well. That team was Citroën. If VW didn't win, Citroën would be the ones to capitalise. The DS3 was strong, having won the Manufacturers and Drivers' Championship in 2011 and 2012 with Sebastian Loeb at the wheel. And it wasn't just the DS3. Citroën had an amazing track record at Rally Deutschland. They had won this event every single time it was held as part of the World Rally Championship. Up to this point, for a long time, it was the case that if you were watching Rally Deutschland, you were watching the battle for second, because first is already decided. Citroën no longer had Sebastian Loeb though, the 10-time winner of this event, but even without Loeb, Citroën proved they could win this event. Ogier won in 2011 after Loeb picked up a puncture and dropped to second after a team orders controversy, and Danny Sordo had his maiden victory for Citroën in 2013. Citroën seemed absolutely unbeatable on the German tarmac. Hyundai had a driver lineup of 3 very strong performers on tarmac: Neuville, Sordo, and Brian Bouffier driving the 3rd i20. But that seemed like the only advantage Hyundai had. Things got even worse for Hyundai during shakedown. If Hyundai couldn't get the car repaired before the start of the rally, his rally would be over before it even started. leaving Hyundai with 2 cars. Still, not the end of the world. Sordo won last year and Bouffier already picked up a podium in the Fiesta first round. So, there is some good news at least. Then, even more good news came. The mechanics somehow managed to fix Neuville's car overnight, and now he was ready to start the rally. On the opening stage, Neuville was slow. His handbrake was still broken from yesterday's crash, and on the tight opening stage, this cost loads of time, and he only went 12th fastest. Luckily, they had 2 cars in the points, Brian Bouffier and Danny Sordo. Bouffier was 10th, but Sordo was in 4th place. He would drop to 6th on the following stage as Mikkelsen rapidly moved up the timing screens to take 3rd place, making it a VW 1-2-3. After the midday service, Neuville had his handbrake fixed and he was now going fast. By the end of the 5th stage, Neuville was up to 6th position behind Sordo in 5th. But then, on the final stage of the day, the undefeatable Volkswagen team had their first bad news in the last 12 months. Ogier had gone off, his car falling to a road below. He was out. Jari-Matti Latvala took the lead, promoting Danny Sordo to the podium. But this wasn't without problems for Hyundai. Neuville had smoke in the cockpit on the final stage, but he managed to bring it back to service to get it all fixed up. The following morning, the rally leader, Jari-Matti Latvala, was fast, but Thierry Neuville was even faster, 2nd fastest on the opening stage of the day. Proved Thierry was one to watch. On the 9th stage, Danny Sordo would do the same as Neuville, but it was the 10th stage where Neuville would really get the hammer down, the 2nd fastest time once more, but this time it was enough to push him up to 3rd place, ahead of his teammate Danny Sordo. By the end of the 2nd day, Neuville remained in 3rd place, a minute behind the dominating Volkswagen of Jari-Matti Latvala. But the good news was that he was also now just 4.3 seconds off the 2nd place Citroën of Chris Meek. Day 3 started with drama. Jari-Matti Latvala decided he wanted to produce some wine. Sliding down the embankment, his car was left in an unrecoverable position. Latvala was out. This moved Neuville up to 2nd. He was now just 4.3 seconds off the new rally leader, Chris Meek, driving the Citroën. Citroën had won here every single time it was held as part of the World Rally Championship, and Chris Meek was now in the perfect spot to do it again, beating Neuville's time in the opening stage of the day by 4.1 seconds, nearly doubling his lead. Neuville had no chance against the flying Citroën. The next stage, Neuville and Meek knew they had to push hard. On stage 16, Chris Meek went late and hard on the brakes, and hard into the concrete wall as well, breaking his Citroën suspension. This promoted Thierry Neuville to the lead of the rally. He now only had 2 stages left to go, 2 stages, and he would pick up his first career victory. It was a treacherous rally. He had a 30-second lead, but despite this, he continued pushing hard, pushing to the limits of what his Hyundai could do. Any small mistake and he'd lose it all. The roads were covered with mud, the stages with varying grip, millions of concrete walls waiting either side of every stage, waiting for another car to consume. He won stage 16, and now he knew he had just 2 stages to go. At the start of the weekend, he had destroyed his car, and now he was leading the rally. 4th place on stage 17 would see him retain the lead, and then there was just 1 stage to go, the power stage. The top 3 on this stage would be awarded extra points. Would Neuville push hard for extra points and risk crashing, or would he hold back and guarantee the win, sacrificing the power stage? We soon found out. The power stage got underway, and Neuville was flat out, pushing hard through the stage to maximise his points. But then, it finally happened. Neuville crossed the finish line to take Hyundai's first World Rally Championship round victory, and he picked up 2 additional points for 2nd on the power stage too. In even more good news, 2nd place went to Danny Sordo, making it a Hyundai 1-2, and this was at effectively Neuville's home event, just 85 kilometers from his German-speaking hometown in Belgium. This would be the only win this iteration of the Hyundai i20 would get. By the end of the season, Hyundai were last in the Manufacturers' Championship, ahead of only single-car teams, effectively last place of all the full manufacturers' teams. But that didn't matter. Hyundai had proven that they could build a car that could compete for victories. The car was still early in its development cycle. What Hyundai failed to achieve in 4 years the first time they tried entering the World Rally Championship, they managed to achieve in just over half a year by 2014. Hyundai had arrived. Hyundai is the perfect example of a manufacturer that's gone from producing absolute garbage rally cars to some really successful stuff. But what about when something goes the other way around? What about when there's a really good brand that just goes to shit? Well, let's find out. Mitsubishi was once a very successful manufacturer in the World Rally Championship, but in 2000, something went very wrong. The car was a disaster. Its handling was hated by its drivers. This was the team that seemed untouchable, the team that made Tommi Mäkinen as famous as he is today. But let's just put into perspective how good Mitsubishi were before they unveiled this absolute pile of garbage of a car. Mitsubishi joined the World Rally Championship in 1989 with a Galant. They did alright for a new team, winning the Rally of Finland in 1989. New cars very rarely win rallies, so that was a promising sign of things to come. They'd pick up a few more wins here and there, but it was in 1993 when Mitsubishi introduced their most famous rally car, the Lancer Evo. The Lancer Evo was also pretty good. Their lead driver, Armin Schwarz, how does he get into all these videos, would pick up a podium in Acropolis Rally Greece. He did have a bit of a tendency to pick up podiums in rough rallies in cars that hadn't finished on the podium before. But it was 1994 when something big happened with some random Finnish guy named Tommi Mäkinen joining the team. He retired from his first rally with suspension damage, so I'm assuming we won't hear anything about him for the rest of the story. Anyway, in 1995, it turned out that Toyota were cheating, and that promoted all the other teams up by one place in the Manufacturers' Championship at the end of that year. And this meant that Mitsubishi would finish second place in the Manufacturers' standings. Well, that's certainly nice. Another new up-and-comer, also from Japan, would take the Manufacturers and the Drivers' Championship that year, Subaru, with Colin McRae narrowly beating Carlos Sainz to the crown after Subaru's more formidable driver missed one round due to a mountain biking injury. But it turns out that this Tommi Mäkinen guy was actually pretty good. In the 1995 Rally of Sweden, Kenneth Eriksson took the Mitsubishi Evo's first World Rally Championship win. But Tommi Mäkinen was second, and he got a few strong results in the following rounds. 1995 was also the end of an era in the World Rally Championship. In 1995, the top class cars were called Group A. Group A cars were heavily upgraded production-based cars. For 1996, a new rule set called the World Rally Car came in. The World Rally Car rule set was important as WRC was losing manufacturers. In 1995 there were only 4, and with Toyota's disqualification, Mitsubishi's second place doesn't sound quite as impressive since they only had to beat what was then a fairly dysfunctional Ford team. So what the FIA did was they made it so the road car didn't have to be all-wheel drive and turbocharged in order for an all-wheel drive or turbocharged car to be entered. This would open up the championship to new manufacturers by reducing the need for costly homologation specials. Audi created the new meta where all-wheel drive and turbos were mandatory to win world championships ever since the 1980s. Only one Lancia ever managed to do it without these since Audi showed up, and that was very early days before Audis even had centre diffs. And this effectively locked out any manufacturer that did not produce an all-wheel drive turbo road car. They also capped engine sizes to just 2 litres among other things. The cap on engine size meant that Subaru needed a new car for the new rules. Ford was legal, but the Escort RS Cosworth was proving to be rather uncompetitive by 1995, so they elected to dump the in-house Escort Group A rally car and contract a team called M Sport to build their new Ford Escort World Rally car for 1996. But Mitsubishi's Group A Lancer Evo was perfectly legal in both the old and the new rules, so they stuck with a Group A car in 1996. A well-known thing in rallying is that whenever a manufacturer brings a new car, it takes about a season or so to make the new car fast and reliable. Keeping an old car around can be beneficial up to a point, although they will always eventually get a bit outdated and slow, so you have to keep this balance. Mitsubishi extended the service life of their Lancer Evo by updating the car rather than replacing it, which is how it got from the Evo 3 all the way to the Evo 6.5, meaning that Evos from 7 onwards are not true homologation specials for WRC, just Group N. But in 1996, it also turned out that this random Finnish guy called Tommi Mäkinen, which by the way is basically the Finnish equivalent of being called John Smith. In fact, I competed against a completely different, unrelated Finnish guy called Tommi Mäkinen in FIA Rally Star. But anyway, this Tommi Mäkinen guy turned out to be incredibly fast. Not the one I compete against, well, he was actually also really fast, but this video is about 90s and 2000s Mitsubishi World Rally cars and not the FIA Rally Star driver that was again. Anyway, this Mäkinen guy was really fast, and well, he proved himself. The season started in Sweden. He walked away with a win. They went to Kenya, a dominant win for Mäkinen. Argentina, he won that. Finland, no question, of course he won that. Australia too, he won 5 of the 8 rounds that year. Absolute domination. He won the World Championship in 1996. Oh yeah, and 1997 too, and 1998 and 1999. At the start of 1996, he'd only ever won 1 World Rally. By the end of 1999, he was a 4-time world champion, equaling Juha Känkkönen and fighting hard with Colin McRae and Carlos Sainz over the title of the most wins achieved in WRC history, something all 3 of them would take the lead of at various times. But in 1999, something happened. The World Rally Car rules were working well, and new manufacturers had finally shown up. Seat turned up in 1998, Škoda in 1999, Peugeot showed up in 1999 as well. M-Sport replaced the old Escort with a new Focus. The competition was coming thick and fast, but in Rally Monte Carlo, Tommi Mäkinen once again started the season off with a win. Rally fans must have been getting rather tired of Tommi Mäkinen winning everything by this point, but in the following rounds, he just wasn't as quick as the previous years. The Mitsubishi was becoming uncompetitive. The reality is, there's more performance that you can get out of a World Rally car than you can get from a Group A car. There was a bit of technical freedom in the World Rally car regulations. The advantage that Mitsubishi had of a familiar car was declining. Mäkinen would pick up 3 more wins in 2000, but it would be another Finn, Markus Grönholm, who would win the World Championship, as well as the symbolically important Rally of Finland. In 2001, however, the Lancer Evo 6.5 was still going strong. Mäkinen would fight hard for the World Championship in its early rounds, leading it after Safari Rally Kenya after the midpoint, when many of his competitors retired. But Mitsubishi decided that enough was enough. The car was too old and it was time for it to be retired to the history books. Starting in 2001, Rally of San Remo. The rally teams headed to Italy to go and enter the Rally of San Remo. The Tarmac Classic event was one that the French teams were expected to go well in. The French drivers, tyres and cars always go well on tarmac, so Mitsubishi's hopes were not high as the debut of the Mitsubishi Lancer World Rally car. The car was no longer an Evo, it was just a World Rally car like the rest of the competition. It wasn't just the Lancer World Rally car that was new though. Citroën, who had first entered the championship in 2001, also had a new car. They decided to give some French rookie guy a shot in the World Rally Championship. There he is. Anyway, Mitsubishi They were finally going to see how well their new car was going. Tommi Mäkinen went out onto the stage and immediately a problem. Something was wrong with the transmission. This made the car difficult to drive and slower through the corners. The transmission system was one part of the car carried over from the Group A car, and when he got back to the service park, none of the mechanics could work out what was wrong with the transmission. WRC transmissions in the early 2000s were extremely complicated things, even more so than today, where regulations have kept the complexity down a bit. The transmissions had loads of parameters and functions that changed levels of locking under certain circumstances, torque distribution, and all sorts of other complicated things. With this amount of electronics, there's always more chance for a mystery issue. With electronic problems, unlike mechanical problems, it's usually unclear exactly what the problem is, since there isn't usually something simple like a mechanical component that's exploded into a million pieces. These transmission systems were just so insanely complicated that an issue can occur that not even the best trained rally mechanics in the world can diagnose. To explain how a Mitsubishi Evo transmission system works, here's a really cool looking video from 2008 that doesn't actually explain anything at all. Now that we've got that cleared up, back to the latest action from 2001. Tommi Mäkinen's teammate, Freddie Loix, also had transmission problems. It's a very strange issue given that it's a carried over system from the Evo. For the remainder of the rally, both of the Mitsubishi Lancer WRCs were just slow for the rest of the rally, setting uncompetitive stage times and consequently getting very little TV coverage. It was all the way towards the end of the rally, with just 2 stages to go, when Tommi Mäkinen's 11th place Lancer finally got some screen time by crashing into a curb and losing a wheel. He pulled off the road and his rally was over. Freddie Loix would be the sole Mitsubishi to finish, taking 12th place in his Lancer, well outside the points. It wouldn't be long after the Rally of San Remo that we get another rally on the Mediterranean. Tour de Corse on the French island of Corsica was next. Big news at the start of the rally. New driver signings would shake up the field for 2002. Tommi Mäkinen had made up his mind. Despite being in the championship fight, he was unhappy with Mitsubishi. He would be headed for Subaru in 2002. Richard Burns would go from Subaru to Peugeot. The 206 was a great car. On the opening stage of Rally France though, it seemed that Tommi Mäkinen's decision to go to Subaru was a good one, as he only managed to set the 11th fastest time. This guy is a 4-time world champion. He knows how to drive, he's not some 11th place type of driver. Stage 2 would see Mäkinen fail to improve by that much, just 10th place. This Lancer just wasn't fast. Mitsubishi made some setup changes to Mäkinen's Lancer for Stage 3. This helped the performance greatly. The rear suspension was made stiffer, and Mäkinen set the 5th fastest time. Perhaps there was just the tiniest bit of potential in the car. On Stage 5, he wanted to go even faster, so he tried a more abstract approach to taking a corner. Evidently, that didn't work, and the car crashed heavily. Co-driver Risto Madison-Mäki would be trapped in the car and airlifted to hospital. He would return to rally co-driving for 2 rallies in 2003, where he'd pick up a podium. Oh yeah, and Freddie Loix finished Rally of France that year in 12th position, by the way. Coming into the Rally of Australia, Mitsubishi were not looking like a strong competitor. Tommy Mäkinen had a bad back, and he had a new co-driver due to the injury to his regular co-driver. His new co-driver wasn't quite so new since he did drive with him previously in 1989, but he still had to readapt to a co-driver he'd last driven with 12 years prior. This wasn't going to be easy for Mäkinen. Freddie Loix was also struggling to adapt to the new Lancer World Rally car, but there was some good news. The rally was the first gravel rally for the Lancer World Rally car, and Mitsubishi were hoping that their car would be more capable on gravel than it was on tarmac. On tarmac, the Peugeots and Citroëns dominated. In fact, Citroën did nearly all of their testing and development on tarmac, only simply made adaptations for gravel. So the top 5 spots were effectively reserved for French cars on tarmac, meaning that Mäkinen's 11th place wasn't quite as far off the place as it was seen, as Ford, Hyundai, Škoda and Subaru would also struggle on the tarmac. But as stage 1 came around, it seems like more of the same. A short, super special stage in Perth would see Tommy Mäkinen set a less than stellar time, 17th place. But to be fair, it was just a super special. They don't really mean a great deal for the rally overall. Stage 2 would see Mäkinen struggle. He felt that the car seemed to feel heavy and a bit unresponsive. The car was tricky to control, and he was struggling with the pace notes too. He placed 7th though, on stage 2. He'd remain in 7th place for the following few stages, but would soon climb to 6th and into the points by the 5th stage. At the same time, Freddie Loix continued to struggle with his Lancer, getting away with this heavy impact on his way to place 943rd or wherever he was. But Tommy Mäkinen would find himself in a close battle with a Subaru of Petter Solberg. He dropped to 7th on stage 11, but setting the 4th fastest stage time on stages 12 and 14 would aid Mäkinen in getting that all-important 6th place back. Remember, he was still fighting for the World Rally Championship, and before the Lancer World Rally car showed up, he was only a point behind Colin McRae, and since neither Mäkinen nor McRae had scored since New Zealand, there was still only 1 point between them. This championship was tight, and to make matters better for Mäkinen, McRae was only 1 position ahead in 5th place, so the championship was wide open. This was a true classic. Mitsubishi were working out their new car, and it clearly wasn't a very good car, but they only needed 1 more point than the struggling Colin McRae, and they'd clinch the World Rally Championship at the end of the year. Mäkinen went from 5th fastest on stage 18, then 4th fastest on the following stage. The Lancer was not a winning car by any means, but it was at least far more competitive on the gravel than it was on the Mediterranean tarmac. The 21st stage of the Rally of Australia would be an historic stage. This stage would be televised on live TV, something that the WRC didn't do before this. Tommy Mäkinen clearly wanted to give the cameras a good show. He absolutely flew over the famous Bunnings jumps, despite the issues with his back. He set the 2nd fastest time on the stage. That Lancer might have had some potential hiding in it on gravel, and the team in Mäkinen maybe just needed more familiarity with setting up and driving the car to be fast. Between the top 4 drivers, Ford's Colin McRae led the World Championship by just a single point from Tommy Mäkinen in the Mitsubishi. In 3rd place was Subaru's Richard Burns, 1 point behind Tommy Mäkinen. Carlos Sainz was 4th on 33 points, technically in the running for the World Drivers' Championship, but would need all 3 top drivers to retire and take the win in order to win the championship. Something that was very possible given the reliability of early 2000s World Rally cars compared to today, and the fact the top 3 would be pushing quite hard, and therefore likely to make a mistake. This was the championship finale that would keep everyone on the edges of their seats. If Richard Burns won and Colin McRae finished below 2nd, or any other combination of positions where Burns outscores McRae by 3 or more points, and Mäkinen by 2 or more, Burns would be the world champion. he had fewer wins than McRae, so would be dropped behind on countback if McRae finished on the same number of points. The same goes for if Mäkinen and Burns finish on the same points. If Mäkinen was on the same number of points as McRae though, McRae would be world champion, since although both had 3 wins, McRae had a second place as well, and Mäkinen didn't. All 3 drivers were going to have to go absolutely flat out. Mitsubishi knew that their car was troublesome, consequently they did heaps of testing for Rally GB, knowing how important this round was. This was the last chance for Mitsubishi to take a World Drivers' Championship with Mäkinen. With Alistair McRae and Francois Delacour signed for 2002, they weren't looking like strong championship contenders with that driver lineup. Both knew how to get a car around, but they weren't championship material. Well, Delacour sort of, about 10 years earlier, but not in 2002. The rally started with a nighttime super special stage in Cardiff. Colin McRae would take the win on the super special stage, with Tommy Mäkinen 18th, that's huge, and Richard Burns was 10th. It was all going well for the Scotsman, but not to plan for Tommy Mäkinen. But the good news is that super special stages are super short stages, and they don't really matter that much. Mäkinen felt that the car handled well out on the forest stages. We'd see the car's real pace. Colin McRae was going fast out in front, but Tommy Mäkinen was also flat out himself. He wasn't planning to make things easy for Colin McRae, but oh no! That did not look good. Let's have another look at that. It doesn't sound good either. Mäkinen's front left suspension broke after hitting something in the road, and his rally was over. Mäkinen would not be the 2001 World Rally Champion. It was now down to Colin McRae and Richard Burns, and Colin McRae was leading both the World Rally Championship and the rally, so it was looking great for McRae's hopes of his second World Championship. And just look how committed he is driving that Focus, and oh no! That was too committed. So with McRae out, Burns now just has to score more than 2 points and he'll be the World Champion. That's fallen right into his hands, but oh! He's gone off! Lucky for him, he's managed to get the car back on the road, but you don't want to be doing that when you're fighting for a World Championship. Eventually, Richard Burns managed to finish 3rd place and took the 2001 World Rally Championship. Mäkinen, who was looking like the clear favourite before Mitsubishi introduced the new car mid-season, was 3rd in the drivers' standings, and now he was off to Subaru. The following year, Mitsubishi didn't have the driver lineup, and they still couldn't figure out the car. They finished P6 out of 6 in the World Championship, scoring points in just 1 round, and they left the World Rally Championship at the end of that year. They would return in 2004 with the Lancer WRC 04. They took the year off to test their car and work out how to make it fast. So, did it work? Let's find out.
January on the French Riviera means only one thing: the Rally Monte Carlo, round 1 of the 2004 World Rally Championship. 2004 also sees the return of Mitsubishi to the WRC after a year's absence. The product of that year is the Lancer WRC 04.
It was a big day for new cars in the World Rally Championship. Peugeot had retired the 206 to the purgatory of being a perennial privateer car.
Long live the 307! With no silverware in 2003, the new car was expected to deliver.
Bringing the 307 World Rally car as their new competitor, and Mitsubishi brought their new car, the Lancer WRC 04. It was to be driven by French tarmac legend Gilles Panizzi and Italian hotshot Gigi Galli. With the legacy of a multiple-time World Championship winning team and a whole year where the team did nothing but testing, pressure would be to perform, and perform well. Failure was not an option. Stage 1 was cancelled by the organisers because there was too many spectators for the stage to be safe. Stage 2 would therefore open the rally instead. The cars were getting ready to go, the drivers were ready. A car developed by a World Championship winning team with a strong driver lineup was about to start. It's time to see how the legendary Mitsubishi would go. Gilles Panizzi launched his Lancer out onto the open road, throwing the rally machine around the stage. His teammate, Gigi Gali, did too. They pushed hard and pushed fast, and by the end of the stage, they were all the way up to 8th and 11th. They were in 8th and 11th? A whole year of preparation, and that's what they did? But maybe they just needed to dial in the car. It was a new car after all, and it can take a bit of time to learn the car. Set it up right and get the thing going. And on stage 3, Gigi Gali set out to try to prove this. He went 4th fastest on stage 3, and that put him up to 7th overall. But just remember, this is a partially snow, partially tarmac rally, and sometimes you just get lucky with a tyre choice and you can get some very strange stage results in Monte Carlo. And you can tell that this was probably that because he only held this position for a single stage, as he fell back down to 8th overall following a 13th place finish on stage 4. But at least he was doing better than his teammate, Gilles Panizzi, who was, for some inexplicable reason, in 21st, behind some S1600 Suzukis. I can't find any notes anywhere explaining why he was that slow, but if things looked bad for Mitsubishi on stage 4, they were going to get even worse on stage 5 because their leading driver, Gigi Gali, crashed out of the rally on stage 5. But he must have activated the Lancer's secret feature that wipes the memory of any nearby cameras, since there is not a single video or picture of this happening that I can actually find. But Gali's crash meant that Mitsubishi's only remaining car was driven by Gilles Panizzi, and it was all the way down in 12th position. Panizzi would improve a few places over the next few stages, and would gain 3 places on stage 9 after Carlos Sainz and Mikko Hirvonen crashed out, and Roman Cresta's car stopped working. This was presumably done to market Hyundai by showing how similar the rally car's reliability was to the road car it was based on, but the rest of the rally was uneventful for Panizzi, who finished in 6th position, bringing the team some points on debut. Not too bad, but how did they go on loose surfaces? The Rally of Sweden is a rally that's held in Sweden. This is fascinating, but what about the cars? Well, apparently it's got those too. Specifically, the Mitsubishis we're talking about. Gilles Panizzi would drive one, but Gigi Gali would not drive the other. Instead, Christian Solberg, who is not related to Petter and Henning Solberg, in fact he isn't even Norwegian, and his name's spelled differently, would drive the other car. On stage 1, Gilles Panizzi stunned the world with his amazing pace, except for the fact that he didn't because he went 17th fastest, behind Matthias Ekström, who was driving a Lancer Evo Group N production car, and he's a driver who was actually a circuit racer with less than 20 rallies driven in his entire career in any championship. He's a legendary driver on the circuit and went on to be DTM champion that year, but being beaten by him on snow whilst he's driving the lower category version of the same car you're competing with does not sound particularly fun, even for a tarmac specialist like Gilles Panizzi. And Christian Solberg was a spot below Panizzi. The Mitsubishis continued to struggle to keep up with production cars for the next few stages, being well outside the top 10. But this struggle wouldn't last forever, because things were about to turn around for Mitsubishi, because on stage 4, Gilles Panizzi's gearbox failed, and then on stage 6 Christian Solberg's transmission failed, proving that if things are bad, don't worry, they can always get worse. On the mixed snow and tarmac Monte Carlo rally, things were looking bad, but on the full snow rally in Sweden, it was a complete disaster. The car was absurdly slow, and it was unreliable too. There was literally nothing good about the Mitsubishi Lancer WRC 04. Over the next rounds, things wouldn't improve either. In Mexico, Panizzi would be 8th, with Gali retiring. Then they recorded a double retirement in New Zealand and Cyprus. The car was just utterly crap. After the Rally of Germany, where both drivers crashed out, well, at least it was driver error this time, they decided to once again pull away from the championship for a bit to develop the car. Well, that was sort of in the plan, but you see, the car might have had a little bit of potential, because one of the reasons it was slow was something that's quite fixable. It was lacking a crucial bit of technology that every other serious car had, and that Mitsubishi could have used the whole time. It didn't have an active transmission system. All the top teams had computerized systems that would change the car's diff settings and based on various parameters thousands of times per second to ensure that the car always has optimal grip in all conditions. And just look at the difference between a Mitsubishi and a Subaru in this corner. But Mitsubishi was actually famous for their active transmission systems in the Lancer Evo road cars, which were made originally so they could go rallying. There was the active centre diff, active yaw control, and every other electronic system they could think of. Also, transmission troubles meant that time spent in 2003 was all wasted. The original Lancer World Rally car from 2001 struggled because it was rushed, but the team's technical director decided to scrap the old car's passive transmission system entirely, only to replace it with a new passive transmission, and all this meant they were basically starting from scratch, and the Lancer WRC 04 was essentially a brand new car full of teething problems despite the team spending a whole year developing the new car. They wasted that year. They could have just taken the ACD system from the Evo road car, but they were concerned that the systems would be banned if they started using them in the rally car, so they didn't use them. The trouble is, all the other teams were, so they were just giving away performance for literally no reason. Active transmission systems ended up being partially banned in 2006, and then fully banned in 2012, but since other teams were using these systems in 2004, it was silly not to also run them, especially since they already had a very advanced active transmission system developed and rally proven in the Lancer Evo and its Group N rally car. They returned in just one more round in 2004 in Spain, where they placed 6th and 7th. But then it was time for 2005. This is because 2005 is the year after 2004.
It's January, it's Monte Carlo, it's the start of the 2005 World Rally Championship. Robin Perra will be certain to be giving it his all to get Mitsubishi into the frame. Gilles Panizzi provides the backup in Monte Carlo.
Mitsubishi was back for 2005 with the Lancer World Rally car, called the Lancer WRC 05. Very creative for the new season. The car was updated, modernised, and featured an active transmission system like every other rally car had been using already for the majority of the decade. The driver lineup featured Gilles Panizzi and Robin Perra, but not Calais, his dad instead. Gilles Panizzi would drive only part-time, with Gigi Gali driving the rounds that Panizzi would not drive. Gali would drive by far the majority of rallies in the second of the two Mitsubishis, whilst Robin Perra would be Mitsubishi's full-time driver, marking the first time the Finn had driven a Mitsubishi in the World Rally Championship since he drove a Galant in VR4 in 1994. Overall, the team had a pretty good driver lineup for 2005. On the first stage though, they seemed to have made literally no progress. Gilles Panizzi was 10th fastest, and Robin Perra was even worse. He was only 12th fastest behind Luca Rossetti in a privately entered Peugeot. I don't even know who that guy is. He didn't even have any TV cameras in the car, certainly not a great first stage for Mitsubishi. The following stage though, things would improve a bit for Gilles Panizzi, setting the 7th fastest time. But Rovanperä was really struggling. 13th place for Rovanperä was on the leaderboard for stage 2, but Panizzi still had some improvements to make. He was getting a bit quicker again, and on the following stage, Panizzi went 4th fastest, and that's an actually competitive time. Now, Monte Carlo does have a habit of producing strange stage times, but this put him up to 7th place overall, and he'd repeat his 4th fastest time on the 5th stage. So that's 2 in a row, which means a chance that it's just a funny stage time from the changeable conditions of Monte Carlo really doesn't look like that's the case. And the consistency that he had over the next few stages would see Panizzi then climb to 6th overall. The Rally of Monte Carlo is a tough rally, and stage 8 would be the toughest of all. The roads were narrow and lined with cliffs and rock faces. Here, they're driving the stage, but let's quickly make it daytime so we can get a real feel of the kind of roads they'd be driving. Yep, they were going to be taking their cars flat out down this road, but at night time. Loeb set off into the stage, dancing his Zara between the walls. Solberg and Grönholm throw their cars at the stage with full commitment, but in and amongst all the big names of rallying in 2005, there was a flash of red. There were plenty of red cars in the 2005 World Rally Championship, but this car was not a Citroën. It was not a Peugeot either. This red car was the Mitsubishi of Gilles Panizzi, and he just won the stage. But was this just a flash in the pan? Well, no, because Gilles Panizzi again proved that it was no fluke when he went 2nd on the 9th stage and 3rd on the 10th stage. This string of stage results at the pointy end of the field, combined with then crashes for Peter Solberg and Markus Grönholm at the same corner as each other, meant that Panizzi found himself suddenly all the way up to 3rd overall. Although he wouldn't set any more impressive times, that would be the place that he finished the rally, 3rd for the tarmac ace. So that was finally a promising sign for Mitsubishi. Rovanperä would be 4th in Sweden, but then things got a little bit troublesome. It would be the last of the team's impressive results for quite some time, but they said they had the low point of the season, which would come just a few rounds later than Sweden in Sardinia, where both cars retired with a gearbox failure. But throughout much of 2005, the Lancer WRC 05 at least found itself finishing at the tail end of the points or just outside of them. But this was progress. The previous year, the car was barely finishing any rallies, and getting any points at all was cause for celebration. Now it was getting back to the points. But the active transmission system they used was from an external supplier rather than being a Mitsubishi system, which is rather strange, and had to be developed for the Lancer World Rally car from scratch, whilst other teams had used fully active transmission since the beginning of the decade. But what that meant is that the car still had potential. Because they were behind on their development, that meant there was room for them to catch up. Things were starting to look good, and then there was the reliability. Well, they had a double retirement in Sardinia, but in pretty much all the rest of the rounds, the car was very much strong. It was going well, it was finishing rallies, and that was the sign that they needed. But by the end of the season, in November, there was the final rally in Australia, and this one was set to be a real classic. It was already big news at the start of the rally, as Ford brought their new car, the 2006 spec Focus. Since the new car had a new engine, both Fords had to take a 30-second time penalty for an illegal engine change, even though this engine change was because they'd switched the car model entirely. So Ford was now given an uphill battle, given that they were effectively starting the rally 30 seconds behind the competition. Anyone who knew a thing or two about rallying, though, thought that, like usual for 2005, this rally's battle for the win would be all about three drivers, Sebastian Loeb, Peter Solberg and Marcus Grönholm. Chris Atkinson was another dark horse. The Australian finished the rally in 5th the previous year in a Group M car. So what could he do on this familiar rally with a proper World Rally car? But I can tell you one manufacturer nobody was thinking about in Australia was Mitsubishi. But stages 1 and 2 were super special stages, which means they were short and don't contribute much in terms of total rally time. But after the 2 runs through the super special, Rovanperä was 5th and Gali was 10th. Stage 3 would see the rally cars head out into the forest, where the real action happens. Stage 3's results looked exactly as anyone would predict. The names you'd expect were where you'd think they'd be, but on stages 4 and 5, Australia's Chris Atkinson took the fastest time and would lead his home rally as a result. Meanwhile, Rovanperä was down in 7th still, 0.2 of a second off Colin McRae in 6th place. The 1995 world champion was coming back in an attempt to make the Škoda Fabia fast. But on stage 6, Chris Atkinson's steering broke. This slowed him massively, and he lost a huge amount of time limping the damaged Subaru through the stage, but at least he could keep driving the car. That's more than what could be said about Marcus Grönholm. His suspension had collapsed on stage 7, and his rally was over. With just 6.7 seconds now between Loeb and Solberg, Sebastian Loeb knew he had to push, and so did Solberg. On stage 8, Loeb took the lead by going 7.4 seconds faster than Solberg, and now there was just 0.7 seconds in it for the lead. Loeb knew he had to push hard on stage 9, and he did exactly that. Just look at how late he's going to brake into this corner coming up. Well, I guess that is too late, and now his rally is over. His first crash since 2003. In the nighttime super special stage, Rovanperä miraculously won the stage. But being a super special, this doesn't influence his rally position very much because it's a very short stage. Stage 12, Rovanperä would go 3rd fastest though, proving the Mitsubishi had some real pace. And just remember that, yeah, there was a bit of retirements, but Chris Atkinson had got his car fixed up and back up to speed. The Fords may have taken that earlier time penalty, but they were back up to speed, and that was a 3rd place just on merit. But ahead of Duval, McRae and Rovanperä, Solberg was simply unbeatable in the Subaru. He was over 50 seconds clear of anybody else, and he wanted to really stamp his authority on the next stage. But rallying in Australia has unique hazards, and the local wildlife evidently disagreed with Solberg's plans for the day on stage 13. His radiator was destroyed, his engine overheated, and his rally was over. Solberg was distraught. But whilst it was despair for Subaru, it was elation for Mitsubishi on stage 13. Rovanperä yet again set a faster stage time. It was starting to look less like the troublesome Mitsubishi of 2005 and more like the legendary Mitsubishi of 1999 again. Stage 14 would see Rovanperä win the stage yet again. Rovanperä was truly competitive now. He may not have been quite as fast as his son would later become, but rapid Rovanperä reliably wrangled the reluctant, roaring rally car through the wild western wilderness. But on stage 16, he made a mistake, spinning and hitting a tree. His mighty Mitsubishi was miraculously not severely damaged, but he lost some time, and Colin McRae took 2nd place back off the Finnish Mitsubishi driver. But with less than 5 seconds between the two of them, it'd be a big battle between Finland and Scotland over 2nd place. After a few runs through the Super Special at the end of the day, the gap still stood at nearly 5 seconds though, and there was just the final day left to go. Rovanperä sat, waiting at the line for stage 22. It was the final day of the rally, and the lights went out. The Lancer fired out onto the stage. Rovanperä knew exactly how hard he needed to push, and the Lancer was responding well. It was all hooked up, dancing on the limit of performance. McRae's Škoda, on the other hand, was struggling. He was sliding around a bit. It was now to be an epic fight all the way to the finish line. The Mitsubishi of Rovanperä had crossed the line of stage 22, and now, look at this 3D visualization they gave us in 2005's WRC coverage, and look, McRae's coming now, and that is the position change between McRae and Rovanperä up to second. And now, the two would be fighting all the way to the end. There was just the final service of the entire rally to go. They'd go in, set up their cars, fix them up, get them all ready for just the final few stages. But then, Škoda decided to change Colin McRae's clutch. But the job took longer than expected. They spent too long in service and were ruled to have retired as OTL, or over time limit. Now behind Rovanperä was Manfred Stoll, and he was over a minute behind. Rovanperä just needed to now drive the final few stages carefully enough not to crash the car, and he'd be rewarded with second place. And that's exactly what happened. Rovanperä crossed the line to take Mitsubishi's best ever result since 2001. In 2004, the Lancer World Rally car was a truly terrible car, but by 2005 it was at least reliable, had occasionally pace, and given a few competitors having some problems, it could be seriously competitive on occasions. The trouble is, Mitsubishi then did something really stupid. Their WRC program was improving, but they were still having some problems. So by the end of 2005, and instead of asking, how can we fix these problems so we can win rallies, Mitsubishi asked instead, are we good enough to be here? Because at the end of 2005, Mitsubishi announced that they would be permanently leaving the World Rally Championship.